We've done everything we can. Dr. Harrison Cole lowered the stethoscope from Daniel's chest. We've tried every protocol, Mr. Whitmore. Antiviral medication, immunotherapy, neurological stabilizers, fever reducers. We changed his medication twice, adjusted the dosages, and ran the tests again from the beginning. But nothing is working. Richard Whitmore stood frozen at the foot of his son's bed. He was still wearing the wrinkled white shirt he had put on the morning before. His cuffs were unbuttoned. His tie hung loose around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, not because he had been crying, but because he had been fighting not to cry for hours. Daniel, his only son, lay motionless beneath a gray blanket on the large bed. His face was frighteningly pale. His lips carried a faint bluish tint. Every now and then, his thin fingers trembled slightly against the bedsheet, a tiny movement, but enough to twist Richard's stomach into knots. His voice turned hoarse. "What did you just say?" Dr. Cole glanced at the monitor beside the bed. "His body is exhausted. I'm telling you this as plainly as I can because you need to prepare yourself. At this stage, if we keep forcing Daniel's body through more treatment, we may only be prolonging his suffering." He paused and took a slow breath. "I think it may be time to let him rest." Richard took one step forward. "No, Mr. Whitmore." "No," Richard repeated, louder this time. "Do not stand in my son's bedroom and dress surrender up as medical advice." Victoria Whitmore, Richard's new wife, stood near the window. One hand covered her mouth, her face pale in the dim light. She was dressed simply, her hair pinned neatly at the back of her neck, looking like a woman trying to remain composed in the middle of a tragedy. Dr. Cole tried to keep his voice steady. "I know this is painful. You know?" Richard let out a dry laugh, sharp as a blade. "What exactly do you know? After this, you'll go home. You'll sleep. Tomorrow morning, you'll have breakfast. Then you'll take another case. But the person lying in that bed is my son. I understand that he is your son." "No, you don't." Richard pointed straight at Daniel. 6 months ago, he was running 5 miles every morning before school. He was arguing with me about college, about music, about wanting to take a gap year, because he said life was too short to live according to other people's expectations. His voice trembled, but anger quickly covered the fear rising beneath it. "And now you're telling me to give up?" Dr. Cole turned back to Daniel. He stepped closer to the bed, gently lifted Daniel's eyelid to check his pupil response, then pressed 2 fingers to the boy's wrist to feel his pulse. After that, he leaned down and listened to Daniel's breathing again, longer this time, as if searching for another answer buried beneath those shallow, broken breaths. The entire room went silent. Only the monitor kept beeping in cold, steady intervals. Victoria whispered, "Doctor?" Dr. Cole straightened. His shoulders sagged. He released a heavy breath and shook his head. Just one small shake of the head, but it tore something open inside Richard. He lunged forward and grabbed the front of the doctor's coat. "What?" Richard roared. "Are you joking? You have to be joking. Aren't you supposed to be the best? Isn't that why I brought you here? Isn't that why I wrote you a check large enough to buy half the hospital you used to work for?" "Richard!" Victoria cried. Malcolm, the family's longtime manager, stepped forward. "Sir, step back," Richard snapped without looking at him. Dr. Cole raised both hands, trying to keep his balance. "Mr. Whitmore, let go of me. Cure him. I can't promise that." Richard shoved him against the edge of the wooden cabinet. A framed photograph on top of it rattled and fell flat against the polished surface. In the picture, Daniel was 17, sunburned and smiling brightly, holding a fishing rod beside his father on a summer morning in Wisconsin. Richard caught a glimpse of the photo. His grip tightened. "You people have no right to say that to me," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You have no right to stand here with your degrees and your soft, calm voices and tell me my son is out of options." Dr. Cole's face reddened, but his voice remained controlled. "I am not God, Mr. Whitmore. No, but when I hired you, you were perfectly happy letting me treat you like someone who could do what others couldn't. That isn't fair." "Fair?" Richard's laugh sounded almost like a growl. "My son is 18 years old." Dr. Cole looked him directly in the eyes. "And because he is 18, I will not lie to you. His fever keeps coming back. His oxygen levels are dropping suddenly. The tremors are getting worse. Every time he wakes up, the confusion is more obvious. We suspect that organ damage may have begun. But we still don't have a cream diagnosis. Right now, We are only treating the symptoms. Richard released him, only to grab his collar again with both hands. Then keep looking. Run more tests, call more labs, bring in different machines, wake up every doctor in this country. I don't care how much it costs. This isn't about money. It's always about money. Everyone has a number, not death. From the bed, Daniel made a tiny sound, almost a breath, almost a moan. Richard immediately let go of Dr. Cole and spun around. He rushed to his son's side, took Daniel's ice-cold hand, and bent close to him. Daniel? It's Dad. I'm right here. Daniel's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved, but no clear words came out. His hand trembled in Richard's palm, too weak to truly hold on. Victoria stepped closer, her voice softening. Richard, please. Let the doctor make him more comfortable. Richard slowly turned his head toward her. Comfortable? Victoria froze. Our son is not an animal being put down, Victoria. A flash of pain crossed her face, or at least, in the dim light of the room, it looked enough like pain to be believed. That's not what I meant. Dr. Cole adjusted his glasses and smoothed down the shirt Richard had wrinkled. He looked as if he had aged several years in just a few minutes. There are still measures we can take to ease his discomfort. Fluids, fever control, sedation, if necessary. Richard remained beside the bed, his hand wrapped tightly around Daniel's. You will not sedate him into silence just because you ran out of answers. His body needs rest. His body needs a doctor who hasn't given up. Dr. Cole pressed his lips together. Threatening me will not create a cure. Richard stepped toward him again. But this time, his voice dropped very low. That made every word even more frightening. Listen to me carefully. If my son dies because you were too arrogant to admit that you missed something, I will destroy your career piece by piece. Every board seat, every license review, every hospital that has ever hung your name on a wall. I will make sure the whole country knows that the great Dr. Harrison Cole stood in my son's bedroom, shrugged, and told a father to give up. Richard, Victoria said softly, don't do this. He did not look at her. Dr. Cole looked Richard straight in the eye. And what if I keep treating him blindly and make things worse? For 1 second, Richard's face changed. Beneath the anger was the naked terror of a helpless father. Then stop being blind. No one answered. Outside, wind from the lake brushed softly against the window. Inside the room, the sweet smell of almond milk still lingered in the air. The glass Daniel had finished that morning remained on the bedside table. Dr. Cole returned to the bed. He checked Daniel's temperature again. The number made him frown. 104.1 degrees Fahrenheit, he said. Victoria's hand tightened on the back of a chair. Richard looked from the thermometer to his son's bluish lips. Dr. Cole reached for the medication tray. We need to bring his fever down now. Richard looked at him, suspicion mixed with desperation in his eyes. Will it save my son? The doctor did not answer quickly enough. Richard clenched his jaw. I asked you, will it save my son? It may help stabilize him for the moment. For the moment, Richard repeated, as if those words were a sentence. Daniel's fingers trembled again. His breathing began to quicken. Richard bent down and pressed his forehead against his son's cold hand. Hold on, Daniel, he whispered. This time, his voice carried no threat, no power, nothing of the billionaire who was used to giving orders to the world. Only the voice of a father begging. Do you hear me? Hold on a little longer. I don't care what they say. I will not let you leave this world. Victoria stood behind him in silence. Malcolm's eyes flicked toward the glass of almond milk on the bedside table. Just for a second. Very quickly. Then he looked away. Dr. Cole prepared the injection with the careful hands of a man who had done this thousands of times. But for the first time that night, even he no longer seemed certain that his work had been enough, and Richard stayed beside the bed. One hand held Daniel's frozen fingers. The other gripped the bedsheet tightly, as if by sheer strength alone. He could keep his son in this world just a little longer. By noon, the entire Whitmore estate had sunk into a heavy silence. The door to Daniel's room closed with the softest click. Yet the sound still made Richard flinch, as if he had just heard a sentence being passed. He had stayed beside his son's bed for hours, until Victoria finally stepped forward and gently touched his arm with both hands. The wedding ring on her finger caught the pale hallway light, flashing with a cold glint. Richard, she said softly, you haven't eaten anything since yesterday morning. He did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the narrow gap of the half-open door. where a corner of Daniel's bed was still visible. "I'm not hungry." "I know." Victoria lowered her voice, soft and careful, like someone trying to soothe a man on the edge of breaking. "But Daniel needs you standing. He doesn't need to see you collapse beside him." Richard's jaw tightened. It looked as if he wanted to argue, to say that no one had the right to tell him to leave his son's side. But he was too tired, too drained to summon another burst of anger. Victoria leaned closer. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "I know Daniel isn't my biological son. But since the day he got sick, I've prayed for him every night." This time, Richard turned to look at her. Victoria's eyes were wet, not enough to ruin her makeup, but just enough to make someone believe she was heartbroken. Her thumb brushed lightly over his sleeve, a tender gesture, as if she were trying to keep herself from crying. "I keep thinking," she said, "if only I had noticed sooner. If only I had pushed you to take Daniel in for tests the moment he started getting tired." "You've done enough," Richard said, his voice rough. "No." Victoria shook her head. "A mother never feels she has done enough." Richard said nothing. Perhaps he was too exhausted to notice how perfectly timed those words sounded. He allowed Victoria to guide him down the hallway toward the stairs. Behind them, Malcolm Reed stood near Daniel's door, his arms folded across his chest, his cold face revealing nothing. When Richard and Victoria had disappeared from view, Malcolm turned to the two nurses standing outside. "Mr. Whitmore does not want to be disturbed unless absolutely necessary. Dr. Cole's orders are to be followed exactly. No unnecessary questions. No changes of any kind unless the doctor requests them." One nurse nodded immediately. The other glanced toward Daniel's room, her throat moving as if she had swallowed something she did not dare say. Downstairs, in the staff kitchen, Mrs. Grace was washing the same coffee cup for the third time. She dried it, then glanced discreetly toward the main kitchen. There, Victoria stood with Malcolm while Richard took a phone call in the dining room. The moment Richard was out of sight, Victoria's expression changed. The sadness was still on her face, but it thinned quickly, like a curtain that had not been fully drawn shut. "He nearly lost control with Cole," Malcolm said under his breath. "He is a father watching his only son fade away day by day," Victoria replied. "Of course he lost control. Does that worry you?" "What worries me," Victoria said, picking up a clean glass from the counter and holding it under the light, "is any stranger stepping into this house. The care agency is sending someone." "I know." Victoria turned the glass in her hand, checking it for water spots. "They said she's young. A home care aide, not a licensed nurse. Then she should be easy to manage." Victoria set the glass down. "Don't underestimate people simply because they stand beneath you, Malcolm. Mistakes often begin with that kind of contempt." Mrs. Grace quietly stepped back before either of them could notice her. She lifted a basket of neatly folded towels, even though they did not need to be taken anywhere, and walked toward the laundry room. At the end of the hallway, she stopped and looked up toward the second floor. "Lord," she whispered, "if you are sending that child into this house, please let her be wise enough." Elsewhere in the city, Annie Williams stood in the cramped bathroom of her mother's apartment, using both hands to pin her hair back while trying not to let the worry show in her eyes. She looked at herself in the mirror, 18 years old, too young for people to trust, too poor to be allowed to make mistakes, but still old enough to understand that one good job could change the course of her life. A few minutes later, Annie slung her backpack over her shoulder and walked to the bus stop. The ride north seemed longer than usual. She sat by the window with her backpack on her lap, quietly watching Chicago pass by one block at a time. Small stores, old gas stations, gray apartment buildings. Then, little by little, the city began to change. The streets grew wider. The houses stood farther apart. There were more trees. Every mile seemed to carry her toward a world she had only ever seen in magazines. When she got off at the final stop, Annie walked the rest of the way. The Whitmore property stood behind a tall black iron gate and a stone wall covered in winter ivy. Farther inside, she could see the massive roofline of the house beyond the bare trees, and beyond that, a stretch of gray lake water beneath the November sky. A security guard checked her identification before letting her in. The driveway curved past perfectly trimmed hedges, leafless maple trees, and a fountain that had been shut off for the cold season. 3 black SUVs were parked near the front entrance. Annie wiped her palms on her pants before pressing the doorbell. Malcolm opened the door. He looked first at her employee badge, then at her shoes, and only then at her face. "You're from the agency?" "Yes, sir. Annie Williams." "You're younger than I expected." Annie had learned not to apologize for things she could not change. "I'm certified in home, care support, medication, documentation, vital sign monitoring, and basic patient care. I didn't ask for your resume." A second of silence passed. Then Malcolm stepped aside. "Come in." The main foyer was larger than Annie's entire apartment. A grand staircase curved gracefully up to the second floor. Oil paintings hung along the cream-colored walls. The floor was polished enough for her to see her faint reflection beneath her feet. Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs before Malcolm could say anything else. Her expression softened the instant she saw Annie, like someone who knew exactly when to become kind. "Malcolm," she said, slowly descending the stairs, "don't make her feel as if she has just walked into a courtroom." Malcolm lowered his head slightly. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore." Victoria stopped in front of Annie and took her hand. Her palm was cool, smooth, and so perfect it almost did not feel real. "You must be Annie. Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry if the atmosphere in the house feels tense. Daniel had a very difficult morning." Victoria's voice trembled at exactly the right moment. "He is a good boy. A little stubborn sometimes, like his father, but very good. I know I came into his life late, and I would never pretend I could replace his mother. I only want him to be safe." Annie nodded, unsure what to say. Victoria glanced toward the stairs, then looked back at her. "There may be times when Daniel says things that don't sound like him. The illness confuses him. Every time Richard hears it, it breaks his heart. So if Daniel says anything strange, please don't take it personally. And please don't repeat it in a way that might upset his father even more. We're trying to keep everything peaceful around him." The words were very gentle. So gentle, they almost did not sound like a warning. "I understand," Annie said. Victoria gave her hand one last light squeeze before letting go. "Good. Daniel needs calm people around him." Malcolm led Annie upstairs. The upper hallway smelled faintly of lemon perfume mixed with medicine. Outside Daniel's room, Dr. Cole stood reading the medical chart. He looked up when he saw Annie. "The agency aide?" "Annie Williams, doctor. I need you to record his vital signs, assist with repositioning the patient, and inform me if his temperature rises above the threshold written here." He handed her a clipboard. "No independent decisions, no treatment suggestions, no searching nonsense on the internet. Families in crisis tend to attract far too many people who want to feel useful." "Yes, doctor." He opened the bedroom door. Annie stepped inside, and for the first time, she saw Daniel Whitmore. He looked too young to be surrounded by so many machines, and far too still to belong in a room with a guitar resting in the corner. Daniel's face was pale. His lips had a faint blue tint. One hand lay outside the blanket, trembling slightly, even in sleep. On the bedside table sat a glass with a cloudy white ring at the bottom, as if milk had just been finished. Richard Whitmore sat beside the bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. When Annie entered, he lifted his head. In that moment, she did not see a billionaire. She saw only a father who had nowhere left to hide his fear. If this moment touched your heart, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about truth, courage, and justice. "This is the new caregiver," Dr. Cole said. "She'll assist with routine monitoring." Richard nodded wearily. "All right." Annie moved quietly toward the bed and looked down at the chart in her hands. She could feel Victoria watching from the doorway, and Malcolm standing still in the hall. Daniel's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted. Annie leaned a little closer. "Hi, Daniel. I'm Annie. I'm here to help you a little." His eyes opened halfway. At first, his gaze was empty and lost. Then slowly, it found her face. Daniel's fingers trembled against the sheet. "Don't," he whispered. Annie kept her voice gentle. "Don't what?" Daniel's eyes moved past her, toward the doorway where Victoria stood with a sorrowful, guarded expression. Then his lips barely moved again. "Milk." Victoria immediately stepped into the room. One hand pressed to her chest as if she had been wounded. "Oh, sweetheart," she said in a choked voice. "Not this again." Daniel's room settled into a silence that did not feel peaceful. Annie stood beside the bed with the clipboard in her hands, pretending to read numbers she had already memorized. temperature, pulse, oxygen, medication times. The chart was clean, organized, full of medical words that made everything look controlled. But the young man in the bed did not look controlled. He looked like he was being carried farther away while everyone argued over the map. Dr. Cole adjusted the monitor leads on Daniel's chest, then spoke without looking at Annie. Record his vitals every 30 minutes for the next 2 hours. If his temperature rises above 103.5, notify me. If he becomes agitated, do not engage. Call me. Yes, doctor. Victoria moved closer to the bed and touched Daniel's forehead with the back of her fingers. He's burning again. Dr. Cole checked the reading. It's lower than this morning. That doesn't make it good, Richard said from the chair. No, it doesn't, the doctor replied, but it means the medication helped some. Richard's eyes moved to Daniel's face. Some isn't enough. Victoria glanced at Annie, then gave Richard a tired, gentle look. Let the doctor work, Richard. I have let doctors work for months. No one answered that. Even Dr. Cole seemed to understand there was nothing useful to say. Annie wrote down Daniel's pulse and tried not to draw attention. She had been in rooms with sick people before. Old men who pretended not to be scared. Women who apologized while asking for help. Children with fevers who cried for their mothers. But this room felt different. Too expensive. Too watched. Too full of things nobody was saying. Daniel stirred. Richard leaned forward at once. Danny? Daniel's eyelids lifted. His eyes moved slowly around the room, unfocused, then stopped on Annie. For a moment, he looked less confused than afraid. Annie stepped closer. You're okay. My name is Annie. I'm going to check your temperature, all right? Daniel's lips moved, but no sound came out. Victoria reached for the glass on the nightstand. He should drink a little. His throat gets dry when the fever breaks. Daniel's hand jerked against the blanket. It was small, but Annie saw it. Richard saw it too. His face tightened. Not yet, Dr. Cole said. Let him wake slowly. Victoria set the glass down with a soft sigh. Of course. Annie looked at the glass. A thin white film clung near the bottom. Almond milk, sweet and ordinary. The kind sold in cartons in every grocery store. Nothing about it should have made a young man's hand tremble. Daniel whispered something. Richard bent close. Say it again. Daniel's eyes remained on Annie. Don't let... His voice faded. Victoria brushed hair away from his forehead. He does this. Starts a sentence and loses it. It frightens Richard. But Dr. Cole says it can happen with neurological stress. Dr. Cole did not confirm it quickly. He only said, it can. Annie noticed the hesitation. Richard noticed Annie noticing. Is there something wrong? He asked her. The question came sharp, not cruel, but dangerous. Annie felt the room turn toward her. No, sir, she said carefully. I'm just getting familiar with his pattern. Pattern? Dr. Cole repeated. His vitals, when he wakes, when the fever changes. That is in the chart. Yes, doctor. Victoria smiled faintly. Annie seems very eager. Annie kept her eyes on the clipboard. I just want to do the job right. Richard studied her for another second, then looked back at his son. That makes 2 of us. The next hour moved slowly. Dr. Cole left to take a call in the hall. Victoria stayed in the room, sitting on the edge of the bed as if she belonged in every memory Daniel had, though Daniel turned his face away each time she touched him. Richard paced from the window to the chair and back again. Malcolm appeared twice. Once to bring fresh coffee. Once to speak quietly with Victoria near the door. Annie recorded everything, not only the numbers, the timing, the tremor in Daniel's left hand, the way his lips looked darker when he woke, the way Victoria watched Annie every time Annie looked at the glass, the way Malcolm removed the breakfast tray himself instead of letting a maid take it. When he lifted the tray, Annie saw Daniel's fingers curl. She wrote one small note at the bottom of the page. Reacts to milk, tray. At 3 in the afternoon, Richard finally stepped out to call another specialist. Victoria followed him into the hall, lowering her voice but not enough. He can't keep doing this to himself, she said. Every new doctor gives him another reason to hope, and every hope breaks him harder. He's his son, Dr. Cole said. He is also a man who has not slept in 2 days. If he collapses, what happens to Daniel then? Annie stood by the bed, listening without moving her head. Daniel's eyes opened. This time, he seemed to know where he was. His gaze went to the doorway first, then to Annie. "She's gone?" he whispered. Annie looked toward the hall. "Mrs. Whitmore?" His throat worked. "Don't call her that." The words were faint, but clear. Annie stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Daniel, do you want me to call your father?" "No," panic flashed in his eyes. "Not if she comes." "All right, I won't leave you." He stared at her as if deciding whether that promise could be trusted. "You're new." "Yes, they always leave." Annie felt something in her chest tighten. "I'm here right now." Daniel's fingers moved on the blanket, searching for strength he didn't have. "She brings it." "The milk?" His eyes closed for a moment. "Every morning." "Who brings it, Daniel?" Before he could answer, footsteps approached. Daniel's face changed at once. Fear shut his mouth faster than any medicine could have. Victoria entered with Richard behind her, carrying a fresh, damp cloth. "Oh, good, he's awake." Daniel turned toward the wall. Victoria's smile faltered, then returned. She sat beside him and spoke like a woman performing tenderness for a church room. "Sweetheart, you don't have to be angry with me. I know you're scared." Daniel said nothing. Richard watched his son's turned face and looked wounded. "Danny." "Victoria's trying to help." Daniel's eyes remained closed. Victoria dabbed the cloth across his forehead. "It's all right. I don't take it personally. Sick children say things, even when they're nearly grown. Pain can make them children again." Annie's hand tightened around the pen. Richard looked exhausted. "He wasn't like this before." "No," Victoria said softly, "but we will get him back." The words sounded kind, yet Daniel's breathing quickened under her hand. Dr. Cole returned and checked the monitor. "His pulse is up." "He just woke," Victoria said. Annie said, "It rose when Mrs. Whitmore came in." The room went still. Victoria looked at her. "Excuse me?" Annie felt her heartbeat in her throat. She had not meant to say it aloud, but it was true. And once truth left the mouth, it rarely agreed to go back quietly. "I only mean he seemed calmer a minute ago," Annie said. Then his pulse went up. Dr. Cole stepped in before Victoria could answer. "Patients in Daniel's condition react to many stimuli. Light, sound, pain, confusion. We do not assign emotional causes without evidence." "Yes, doctor." Richard said nothing, but he looked at the monitor, then at Victoria's hand on Daniel's forehead. Victoria withdrew her hand slowly. A little later, Richard left to speak with the specialist from Atlanta. Dr. Cole went downstairs to review lab reports. Malcolm escorted him. Victoria remained in the room with Annie and Daniel. For several minutes, she said nothing. She adjusted flowers in a vase, straightened the blanket, moved the empty glass from the nightstand to a small tray. Then she turned to Annie. "You care very much for details," she said. "I was trained to observe." "Were you trained to imply things about a grieving stepmother?" Annie met her eyes for only a second. "No, ma'am." Victoria came closer. Her voice stayed soft. "Daniel is confused. Richard is fragile. This house does not need suspicion from someone who doesn't understand our family." Annie kept her hands folded around the clipboard. "I understand I'm here for Daniel." Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it now. "Then stay in your place." Annie. The name sounded different in her mouth. Smaller. Victoria left with the tray. Daniel exhaled. A thin, broken sound. Annie waited until the footsteps faded. Then she leaned closer. "Daniel?" His eyes opened just enough. "I won't push you," she whispered. "But if something is hurting you, you can tell me." A tear slipped from the corner of his eye into his hairline. "Library," he breathed. Annie frowned. "What about the library?" His lips trembled. "I saw them." Before he could say more, the monitor beeped faster. His body shivered. Then the fever rolled through him again. Annie pressed the call button and reached for the thermometer. As she waited for Dr. Cole, she looked at the empty space on the nightstand where the milk had been. For the first time since entering the Whitmore house, Annie was certain of one thing. Daniel was not only sick, he was afraid of someone. By evening, Annie had filled 2 pages of her notebook and understood one thing Dr. Cole's chart did not show. Daniel's body was keeping time. Not clock time. Not the clean schedule printed on the medication sheet. A different kind of time. The kind a caregiver learned to notice when a patient could not explain what was happening. The glass came in. Daniel resisted. Someone persuaded him. He drank. His lips changed first, then the tremor, then the heat under his skin. At 6:15, Annie checked his temperature again. 102.7. His pulse was too fast for a young man lying still. She wrote it down, then glanced at the nightstand. The glass was gone. Victoria had taken it with the tray. Daniel slept in short, broken stretches. Every few minutes his fingers jerked against the blanket as if he were trying to hold on to something in a dream. Annie sat in the chair by the window, close enough to hear his breathing, far enough not to crowd him. The room had grown dim. Outside, the lake had turned the color of steel, and the first lights along the shoreline began to appear. Dr. Cole entered without knocking. He checked the monitor, then Daniel's pupils, then the IV site. "Any agitation?" he asked. "No, doctor." He woke twice but didn't speak clearly. Temperature? 102.7 at 6:15. It was 103 at 5:40. He glanced at her notebook. "Use the official chart." "I do. This is just for timing." His eyes stayed on the notebook a second too long. "Timing of what?" "Symptoms. The symptoms are in the file. Not how they line up." Dr. Cole straightened. "Miss Williams, Daniel's case has been reviewed by teams who have spent 30 years studying conditions you cannot pronounce. You are here to assist, not build a theory." Annie closed the notebook slowly. "Yes, doctor." He looked as if he expected more, perhaps an apology. When none came, he turned to the IV pump. "He receives the evening medication at 8. Malcolm will bring the updated sheet." Annie looked up. "Updated?" His father authorized a change after my call with the pharmacy consultant. "Was that the medication from this morning?" Dr. Cole's mouth tightened. "You were told not to make suggestions. I'm asking, so I record it correctly." A small pause followed. "Yes. Same class. Adjusted dose." Annie nodded, though something in her stomach pulled tight. "Yes, doctor." When he left, Daniel opened his eyes. Annie had thought he was asleep. "Don't let them," he whispered. She moved closer. "Don't let them what?" His eyes rolled toward the door. "Change it. The medicine?" He swallowed, and the effort seemed to drain him. "Makes me foggy." Annie lowered her voice. "Daniel, did you feel worse after the new medicine?" He tried to answer, but footsteps sounded in the hall. His eyes shut at once. His whole body went still. Malcolm entered carrying a silver folder. Dr. Cole asked that this be placed on the medication table. Annie stood. "I can take it. I'll put it where it belongs." He crossed to the small table beside the medical supplies and placed the folder down. His movements were exact, almost too exact. Before leaving, he looked at the notebook in Annie's hand. "Taking school notes?" "Patient note. The doctor has charts for that." "I know." Malcolm's smile was thin. "In homes like this, knowing your assignment is the difference between being valued and being replaced." Annie felt the warning land, but she did not lower her eyes. "I'm here to help Daniel." "Then don't confuse helping with interfering." After he left, Annie waited until his footsteps faded. Then she opened the silver folder. The updated medication sheet had a new name written in clean type, along with a dosage schedule. She copied the name into her notebook. She did not know enough to challenge it, but she knew enough to know Daniel feared it. At 7:10, Mrs. Grace came in with a small bowl of chicken broth and a plate of saltines. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had entered sick rooms long before machines learned to beep. "Mr. Daniel awake?" she asked. "Not really." Grace set the tray down. "He used to sneak down to my kitchen when he was little. Said rich people's soup tasted like punishment. But mine tasted like somebody cared." Annie smiled faintly. "He liked soup? Soup, grilled cheese, peach cobbler, anything his mama told him not to eat before supper." Grace's face changed at the mention of Daniel's mother. "That woman kept this house human." Annie looked toward the door. "Mrs. Grace, has Daniel always had almond milk?" Grace's hands paused over the napkin. No. He drank regular milk as a child. Switched after Mrs. Whitmore said dairy. Worsened inflammation. Did Dr. Cole order it? That I don't know. Who prepares it? Grace looked at her now, cautious. Why? Annie heard her mother's voice in her head. Be careful who you make afraid. I'm tracking what he takes, and when symptoms show up, he seems worse after the milk. Grace did not answer quickly. Her eyes moved to Daniel, then to the hallway. You best be careful with thoughts like that. That's not an answer. No, it's advice. Annie lowered her voice. He said milk like he was scared of it. Grace's face tightened. Daniel has been scared of many things lately. Like what? Before Grace could speak, Victoria appeared at the doorway. How sweet. The two of you getting acquainted. Grace picked up the empty water glass. I was bringing broth, ma'am. Victoria entered, smiling, but her eyes went first to Annie, then to the notebook. Annie, Dr. Cole tells me you're taking private notes. I'm recording Daniel's reactions. How dedicated. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and touched Daniel's cheek. He turned his face away even in sleep. She let out a soft sigh, as if wounded by it. He used to be such a warm boy. This illness has made him suspicious of everyone trying to love him. Grace said nothing. Victoria looked at the tray. Broth is fine, but not too much. His stomach is delicate. Then she turned back to Annie. Tomorrow morning, he'll have his almond milk at 7:30. It's part of his routine. Routines comfort him. Annie heard Daniel's weak whisper in her memory. Don't let them. Does it? She asked before she could stop herself. Victoria's expression did not change, but the room seemed to cool. Excuse me? I mean, he seems to resist it. He resists many things. Bathing, medicine, food, sleep. That does not mean we let him deteriorate. Victoria stood. You're new here, so I'll say this kindly. Daniel's mind is not reliable right now. If we followed every fear he expressed, we would never treat him at all. Annie nodded once. I understand. No, Victoria said softly. I don't think you do. But you will. She left with the same calm steps she had entered with. Grace waited several seconds before speaking. You see what I mean? She murmured. Annie looked at the doorway. I see something. Grace picked up the untouched broth. Seeing is the easy part, child. Living after you say what you saw is harder. At 8, Dr. Cole returned with the new medication. Richard came in with him, his face drawn, phone still in his hand from another call that had given him nothing. Victoria stood beside him, close enough to look supportive. Malcolm hovered near the door. Daniel woke when Dr. Cole adjusted the IV line. His eyes widened. No, he rasped. Richard bent over him. Danny, it's medicine. It's going to help. Daniel shook his head weakly. No, Dr. Cole said. He's confused. Hold his arm steady, please. Annie watched Daniel's fingers claw at the blanket. The fear was not vague now. It was aimed at the bag, the line, the hands around him. Richard held Daniel's wrist with shaking gentleness. I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry. Dr. Cole pushed the medication into the line. Daniel's body tensed. His eyes fixed on Annie as if begging her to remember. Within minutes, his lids grew heavy. His mouth slackened. The tremor slowed, but not in a way that looked like healing. It looked like someone turning down a light. Victoria exhaled. There, he's resting. Annie wrote the time in her notebook. 8:04 p.m. Medication changed. Patient resisted. Sedation, fog within minutes. Richard stayed beside the bed, whispering to Daniel. Dr. Cole checked the monitor and looked satisfied. Malcolm left. Victoria followed him a moment later, saying she would bring fresh water. Annie waited until the room settled. Then she looked at the IV bag, the medication sheet, and Daniel's pale face. She did not have proof yet. Only patterns. Milk in the morning. New medicine at night. Fear before both. Worsening after both. But patterns were how hidden things began to show themselves. At 10:30, Mrs. Grace passed the doorway again, this time with towels she did not need to deliver. She met Annie's eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head, warning or prayer, maybe both. Annie opened her notebook to a clean page and wrote one sentence at the top. Something is being given to him. Then she underlined it once, closed the notebook, and looked at Daniel. I'm listening, she whispered, though he could not hear her, even if nobody else is. At 5:42 the next morning, Annie woke in the small staff room with her notebook open on her chest, and the sentence she had written the night before still staring up at her. Something is being given to him. For a few seconds, she did not remember where she was. Then the quiet of the Whitmore house pressed in around her. No traffic outside the window. No neighbor's television through the wall. No pipes clanging in an old apartment building. Just the soft thrum of heat moving through hidden vents and, somewhere upstairs, the life of Daniel Whitmore measured by machines. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and checked her phone. Her mother had sent a message at midnight. You okay? Annie typed back, I'm okay. Long shift. Love you. She did not send the rest. I think something is wrong in this house. I think someone may be hurting him. I think I'm scared. Instead, she washed her face in the small bathroom, tied her hair back, and slipped her father's watch onto her wrist. The old leather strap felt grounding. Her mother used to say a person needed one thing on them that reminded them who they were before the world started telling them who to be. At 6:05, Annie stepped into the hall. The second floor was dim. Downstairs, the kitchen staff would soon begin breakfast. Daniel's almond milk usually arrived at 7:30. If Annie wanted answers, she had less than 90 minutes. She checked Daniel first. He was asleep, or close to it. His skin looked pale under the bedside lamp. His lips were not as blue as the day before, but the color still lingered. Richard had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, one hand resting near Daniel's arm. He looked uncomfortable, neck bent, jaw unshaven. A half-empty mug of cold coffee sat at his feet. For a moment, Annie almost felt sorry for him more than she feared him. He owned everything in the house, and still looked like a man begging outside a locked door. Daniel stirred. Annie moved closer and whispered, It's just me. His eyes opened a little. Morning? Almost. He blinked slowly. Don't let her bring it. Annie's hand tightened around the rail of the bed. The milk? His breath caught. He glanced at his father, then back at Annie. Please. Richard shifted in the chair but did not wake. Annie leaned closer. Daniel, I need you to tell me one thing. Does it happen after the milk every time? His eyes filled with tired frustration. No one listens. I am, he swallowed. She says it helps. Then my hands. He lifted his fingers slightly. They trembled. Then I burn. Annie wanted to ask more, but Richard's eyes opened. What's happening? He said, sitting up at once. Nothing urgent, Mr. Whitmore, Annie answered. He woke for a moment. Richard rubbed a hand over his face, then looked at Daniel. You need anything, son? Daniel closed his eyes. No, he whispered. Annie watched Richard absorb that one word like a punishment. At 6:40, Dr. Cole came in to check vitals. He was freshly dressed, hair combed, voice composed, as if yesterday's failures had been folded away with his old shirt. He reviewed the monitor and nodded to himself. Fever is lower. We'll continue the adjusted medication tonight if he remains stable. Annie wrote that down. Dr. Cole noticed. Still keeping your private record? Yes, doctor. Be careful, Miss Williams. Notes without understanding can become accusations. Annie looked at Daniel before answering. Sometimes notes are the only reason people notice what they missed. Dr. Cole paused. Richard looked up from the chair. The doctor's face cooled. Your confidence is not a credential. No, sir, Annie said. It's not. Richard said quietly. Let her write. Dr. Cole did not like it, but he said nothing more. At 7:05, Annie left the room under the excuse of getting fresh towels. She took the back stairs, the ones Mrs. Grace had used the evening before, and followed the smell of coffee toward the kitchen. The Whitmore kitchen was wide and bright, with marble counters and copper pans hanging in perfect rows. A pot of oatmeal simmered on the stove. Toast waited under a warming cover. Someone had sliced grapefruit into careful halves, each one placed in a white bowl. It looked like a magazine photograph, except for Mrs. Grace standing at the sink with worry in her shoulders. Grace saw Annie and frowned. You're early. I need towels. Towels live in the linen closet, not my kitchen. Annie stepped closer and lowered her voice. Daniel said it again. The milk. Grace glanced toward the hallway. Child. I know, but I need to see who prepares it. Grace turned off the faucet. You think I don't know that? Then help me. Grace looked at her for a long second. You have any idea what happens to women like us when we accuse women like her? Annie did not answer. Grace wiped her hands on a dish towel. We become liars before we finish the sentence. From the far hall came the sound of steps. Grace's expression changed. She lifted a basket from the counter and pushed it into Annie's hands. Pantry. Now, Annie slipped into the pantry just as Malcolm entered the kitchen. Through the narrow crack between the door and frame, she could see part of the counter and Grace by the sink. Mrs. Whitmore will be down shortly, Malcolm said. Grace's voice stayed even. Coffee is ready. She asked that Daniel's almond milk be prepared fresh today. It's in the refrigerator. I'll handle it. A pause, Grace said. That's usually my task. Not today. Annie's pulse began to climb. Malcolm opened the refrigerator and took out the carton of almond milk used only for Daniel. It had his name written on a small white label. He placed it on the counter, then checked the hallway. A minute later, Victoria entered. She looked different when she thought no one important was watching. Less fragile. More awake. She wore a pale robe tied at the waist, her hair loose over one shoulder. Her voice was low. Is Grace alone? Malcolm glanced toward the sink. She's here. Victoria turned to Grace with a sad smile. Would you give us a moment? Richard didn't sleep. I want his coffee brought up before he comes down looking like he's been through a war. Grace did not move right away. Yes, ma'am. She left through the side door, but not before her eyes flicked once toward the pantry. Annie held her breath. Victoria waited until Grace's footsteps faded. Then the sadness dropped from her face. Only half the packet today, she said. His father is starting to watch too closely. Annie felt the words strike through her body. Malcolm reached into the inside pocket of his vest and removed a small white packet. Victoria took it from him, pinched it between two fingers, and looked at it with irritation rather than fear. Half, she repeated. Not more. I need him weak, not dead. Malcolm opened the carton. And the evening dose? Call Cole's office again. Tell them the consultant wants the medication continued. If Cole argues, remind him Richard is desperate and hates uncertainty. Desperate men prefer action. Malcolm poured almond milk into a glass, then added part of the powder. It disappeared almost instantly. He stirred it with a small silver spoon. Victoria watched the liquid turn smooth. Daniel was always too observant, like his mother. He can barely speak now. That doesn't mean he can't ruin everything. Her voice sharpened. He saw us, Malcolm. If Richard believes him even once, I lose this house. This marriage. All of it. You won't. No, Victoria said. I won't. Annie's hands shook so hard the basket nearly slipped. She set it down silently and pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen lit too bright in the dark pantry. She lowered it, thumbed the camera open, and raised it toward the crack. The frame caught Victoria's side profile, Malcolm's hand stirring the glass, the white packet on the counter. Victoria said, After breakfast, move the rest somewhere Grace won't find it. Malcolm nodded. And the girl? What girl? The new caregiver. Victoria was quiet for a beat. Watch her. She notices too much. Annie stopped breathing. Malcolm looked toward the pantry. For one terrible second, Annie thought he had seen the phone. She pulled back, her shoulder touching a shelf. A jar of jam shifted. She caught it before it fell. Malcolm's footsteps came closer. Then Grace's voice sounded from the main doorway. Mr. Whitmore is asking for coffee. The footsteps stopped. Victoria's face changed at once. Of course. I'll bring Daniel's milk myself. It comforts him when I do. Grace said nothing. Annie waited until Victoria and Malcolm left with the tray. Only then did she step out of the pantry. Phone still in her hand. Her legs unsteady. Grace looked at her. Tell me you got something. Annie checked the video. Her hands trembled as the clip played back. Victoria's voice was low but clear enough. Only half the packet today. I need him weak, not dead. Grace closed her eyes. Sweet Jesus. Annie looked toward the stairs, where Victoria was carrying the glass to Daniel's room. I have to stop her. Grace grabbed her wrist. Not alone, but Annie was already moving. She took the back hallway, then the stairs, running as quietly as she could. Every second felt too long. She pictured Daniel's blue lips, his shaking hand, the way he had whispered please. By the time she reached the second floor, Victoria was already at Daniel's door. Inside, Richard's voice sounded tired. He's barely awake. Victoria answered gently, perfectly. Just a little, darling. He always does better with a little nourishment. Annie stepped into the doorway. Daniel's eyes found her over the rim of the glass. Fear widened them. Annie gripped her phone and forced her voice to work. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Everyone turned. Victoria's hand froze with the glass inches from Daniel's mouth. Annie walked into the room, no longer caring that her shoes were cheap, that her badge said caregiver, that she had been warned to stay in her place. Don't let him drink that. The room did not explode at first. It tightened. Victoria held the glass near Daniel's mouth. Her fingers curved around it as if she had every right in the world to be there. Richard was standing beside the bed, tired eyes moving from the glass to Annie's face. Doctor. Cole had just entered behind him with his chart tucked under one arm. Malcolm stood near the doorway, and for the first time since Annie had met him, his calm looked forced. What did you say? Richard asked. Annie kept her eyes on the glass. Don't let him drink that. Victoria lowered the glass slowly. Her face showed hurt before anger. And Annie knew at once she had practiced that order. Richard, this is becoming cruel. Daniel has barely taken anything since yesterday. Daniel's lips trembled. He tried to turn his face away from the glass, but he was too weak to move far. Richard noticed. Annie, he said, voice low, you had better explain yourself. I saw what was put in it. Victoria's eyes sharpened. Careful. Annie reached into her pocket and held up her phone. I recorded it. The words changed the room. Malcolm stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, I should take that device. Staff are not permitted to record inside the residence. No one touches her phone, Richard said. Malcolm stopped, but his jaw tightened. Dr. Cole frowned. Recording without consent is a serious issue. So is poisoning a patient, Annie said before she could soften it. Victoria gave a shocked breath. Poisoning? Richard, listen to her. She is accusing me of poisoning your son. I'm accusing someone of putting powder in his milk, Annie said. And I'm saying Daniel gets worse after he drinks it. Victoria's eyes glistened. You've been here less than a week. I have sat beside that boy for months. I have fed him, prayed over him, held Richard while he fell apart, and now you walk in here with a phone and decide I'm a monster? Richard looked at Annie. Show me. Annie unlocked the phone with a shaking thumb and played the video. The screen was small, the angle imperfect, but the image was clear enough. Victoria stood in the kitchen beside Malcolm. Her voice was low, but the words carried. Only half the packet today. His father is starting to watch too closely. Richard's face went still. The video continued. Malcolm poured almond milk into the glass. Victoria watched him add the powder. Then came the sentence Annie wished Daniel did not have to hear. I need him weak, not dead. Daniel made a sound from the bed, thin and broken. Victoria turned pale, but only for a moment. Then she recovered. That is not what it sounds like. Richard did not look at her. Then what is it? It's a supplement. Dr. Cole knows Daniel has been losing strength. Dr. Cole looked up sharply. I prescribed no powdered supplement. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Malcolm stepped in. Mrs. Whitmore may have misspoken. The family has received a number of nutritional recommendations from consultants. Which consultant? Richard asked. Malcolm hesitated. Richard's voice hardened. Name. Victoria set the glass on the nightstand with deliberate care. Richard, please. Not in front of Daniel. Daniel whispered, Dad. Richard turned to him at once. I'm here. Daniel's eyes were fixed on Victoria. His breath came unevenly. I told you. Victoria took a step toward the bed. Sweetheart, you're confused. Daniel flinched. That small movement did more than Annie's video. Richard saw it. Annie watched his face as something in him shifted from denial into pain. Don't touch him, Richard said. Victoria stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Cole reached for the glass. "I'll have this sent out." "No," Annie said. Everyone looked at her again. She swallowed. "Not sent out by anyone in this house. Not through Dr. Cole's regular lab. Not through Mrs. Whitmore. Not through Mr. Reed. Call someone independent. Right now, and test the IV bag too." Dr. Cole's eyebrows drew together. "The IV bag?" Annie turned to him. "Daniel said the new medicine makes him foggy. Mrs. Whitmore told Malcolm to call your office and keep it changed." "I heard that too." Dr. Cole's face flushed. "My office received a message from a consultant connected to the family. The recommendation was reviewed." "By whom?" Richard asked. The doctor held his stare for half a second, then looked away. "My assistant forwarded it. I approved the continuation based on Daniel's condition." Richard's hand closed around the bed rail. "You changed my son's medication because of a message? It matched a possible treatment path." "Possible," Richard repeated. Victoria spoke softly. "Richard, he was trying to help." Richard turned on her. "Do not help me understand anything right now." The words struck her harder than a shout. Annie looked at Daniel. His eyes were open, clearer than she had seen them, though pain still held him down. He was watching his father like a young man trying to decide if it was safe to hope. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed. "This is Richard Whitmore. I need an independent toxicology team at my residence immediately." "No, not tomorrow. Now, bring someone who can test food, medication, and blood samples on site." He listened, then said, "I don't care what it costs." When he hung up, Malcolm moved closer to Victoria. It was subtle, but Annie saw it. So did Mrs. Grace, who had appeared silently in the hall with a tray of coffee no one would drink. Richard looked at Malcolm. "Step away from my wife." Malcolm froze. Victoria's eyes widened. "Richard." "I said step away." Malcolm moved back. Dr. Cole lifted the IV bag and studied the label. "This is the medication listed on the updated sheet." Annie pointed to the second line. "But the dosage time changed after the call, didn't it?" Dr. Cole checked the chart. The confidence drained from his face by inches. The evening administration was advanced. "Who requested that?" Richard asked. The doctor did not answer. Victoria's voice cracked. "Are we really doing this? Are we really letting a girl from an agency turn this family against itself?" Annie felt the insult but did not take the bait. "This family was already in trouble before I got here." Victoria stared at her. Richard said, "Enough. Until the toxicology team arrives, Daniel gets nothing by mouth and nothing through that IV, unless Dr. Cole and I both approve it in this room." Dr. Cole nodded. "That's reasonable." Victoria let out a small laugh. "Reasonable? My husband is treating me like a criminal in my own home." Daniel whispered, "Library." The room went quiet again. Richard bent closer. "What?" Daniel's eyes moved from Victoria to Malcolm. His voice shook, but the words came. "I saw them." Victoria's face changed before she could stop it. Malcolm said, "He's delirious." Daniel's hand trembled on the blanket. "West Library." Richard looked from his son to his wife. "Saw what?" Victoria stepped in quickly. "He's had this fixation for weeks. Dr. Cole told you the confusion could create false memories." Dr. Cole looked uncomfortable. "Neurological distress can cause disorientation, but false memories are not something I diagnosed." Annie moved closer to Daniel. "You don't have to say it all now." Daniel looked at her with wet eyes. "They said I'd sound crazy." Richard's face folded around the words. He reached for his son's hand, but Daniel was staring at him as if the question had been waiting inside him for months. "You didn't believe me," Daniel whispered. Richard closed his eyes. Victoria tried to take Richard's arm. "He doesn't mean that." Richard pulled away. The toxicology team would not arrive for another hour, and the police had not yet been called. But something had already been taken from Victoria. Not her freedom. Not yet. Something more immediate. The room no longer obeyed her. Annie stood beside Daniel's bed, phone in one hand, notebook in the other, and understood that the video had opened only the first door. Behind it was the milk, the medicine, the library, and whatever Daniel had seen that made two adults decide his mind had to be destroyed before his words could be believed. Richard looked at Annie then. No longer as a staff member, not yet as an ally, but as the only person in the room who had stopped the glass from reaching his son's mouth. "Stay with him," he said. Annie nodded. "I will." Daniel's fingers found the edge of her sleeve and held on with almost no strength. Victoria watched that small gesture, and for the first time, Annie saw fear in her eyes. Richard's order changed the air in the room. Stay with him. It sounded simple, but Annie knew what it meant. Until now, she had been the hired girl from the agency. The one Dr. Cole corrected, the one Malcolm watched, the one Victoria expected to scare back into silence. Now Richard Whitmore had placed her beside his son and told the house to accept it. Victoria did not accept it. She only smiled as if she had swallowed something bitter. "How comforting," she said. "Daniel has known her for less than a week, and suddenly she's family." Richard did not turn around. "No one said that. You didn't have to." Daniel's fingers still held the edge of Annie's sleeve. His grip was weak, but he refused to let go. Annie kept her arms still so he would not feel her tremble. Dr. Cole stood near the medication table, reviewing the IV label for the third time. The more he looked, the less certain he became. His face had lost its practiced calm. Richard noticed. "Doctor?" Dr. Cole set the bag down. "The medication itself appears consistent with the label, but I can't verify the source without testing. The chain of communication is not as clear as it should be. That is a polite way of saying you don't know what was put into my son. I am saying we need confirmation." Richard gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "Now we need confirmation." Victoria stepped between them slightly. "Richard, blaming Dr. Cole won't help Daniel. I'm not done deciding who to blame." Her eyes flicked toward Annie. "Then start with the person who came into this house and secretly recorded your wife." Annie lifted her chin. "I recorded what I saw. You hid in a pantry, because you weren't going to invite me to watch." For the first time, Victoria's mask cracked in front of Richard. It was quick, a flash of anger around the mouth. But it was there. Malcolm moved closer to the door. Richard saw it. "Where are you going?" Richard asked. "To inform security that outside personnel will be arriving," Malcolm said. "Use the phone here. There are gate protocols. Use the phone here." Malcolm paused, then crossed to the wall phone near the sitting area. His back was straight, but Annie saw his hand tighten around the receiver. Mrs. Grace remained in the hallway, half hidden by the doorframe. She looked at Annie once, not with fear now, but warning. The first proof had been shown, but proof in a rich man's house could disappear before it learned how to breathe. Richard turned to Dr. Cole. "I want every medication in this room sealed." Dr. Cole nodded. "That would be wise." "Not wise. Necessary." The doctor opened a cabinet and began removing vials, syringes, and labeled bags, placing them on a clean towel. Annie watched each item, writing names and times in her notebook. Victoria noticed. "Still writing your little notes?" she asked. Richard cut in. "Let her write." Victoria's lips pressed together. Daniel shifted under the blanket. Annie leaned closer. "Do you need water?" His eyes opened just enough. He looked toward the nightstand where the milk had been, then gave the smallest shake of his head. "No milk," Annie whispered. "I promise." His breathing eased. The promise did not escape Richard. He lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, the movement heavy, like his body had finally caught up with the night he had lived through. "Danny," he said, "when the team gets here, they're going to take a little blood. They'll test the milk. They'll test the medicine." Daniel stared at the ceiling. "She'll lie." Victoria drew in a breath. "Daniel." He flinched at her voice. Richard's eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, something in them had hardened. "Victoria, step out." She looked at him as if she had misheard. "What?" "I need to speak to my son. I'm your wife, and he is my son." The room went silent. Victoria's face filled with hurt again. But this time Richard did not move toward it. Malcolm looked down at the floor. Dr. Cole busied himself sealing supplies he had already sealed. Victoria walked to the door. As she passed Annie, she stopped close enough that only Annie could hear. "You think this makes you important?" she whispered. "It makes you useful for the moment. There's a difference." Annie did not answer. Victoria left. Malcolm followed after one look from Richard. Mrs. Grace stepped aside to let them pass, then vanished down the hall. When the door closed, Daniel began to cry. Not loudly. There was not enough strength in him for that. Tears slipped down the sides of his face into his hair. Richard reached for him. Son. Daniel turned his face away. I told you. Richard swallowed. I know. No, Daniel whispered. You don't. I told you before. I told you I saw them. Richard leaned closer. In the library? Daniel shut his eyes. She said I was sick, said I was jealous, said I didn't want you happy. Richard's mouth tightened. Dr. Cole stood still near the cabinet, no longer pretending not to listen. Annie asked softly, Daniel, did you see Mrs. Whitmore and Malcolm? Daniel's fingers tightened again on her sleeve. They were kissing. Richard's face drained. In the West Library, Daniel continued, each word costing him. I went to get Mom's book, the green one. She used to write in it. He tried to breathe through a tremor. I saw them. Malcolm grabbed me. She said if I told Dad, he'd think the illness was making me confused. Richard stood so suddenly the chair scraped the floor. Daniel looked afraid he had said too much. Dad. No, Richard said, but the word was not for Daniel. No. He walked to the window, then back, as if the room had become too small to hold him. His fists opened and closed. The great Richard Whitmore, the man who could move markets and buy silence with a signature, had no defense against the fact that his son had begged to be believed and had been left alone with his fear. Dr. Cole spoke carefully. Mr. Whitmore, Daniel is lucid at this moment. But given his condition, Richard turned on him. Choose your next words with care. The doctor stopped. Daniel whispered, Don't let her take me away. Richard came back to the bed at once. No one is taking you anywhere, she said a center. A private one. Where I could rest. Richard looked toward the closed door. Annie remembered Victoria's voice in the kitchen. I need him weak. Not dead. She thought of the powder disappearing into the milk. The changed medicine. Daniel's fog after the IV. A private center would not be treatment. It would be distance. Control. A place where Daniel's words could vanish behind medical language. There was a knock. Richard opened the door himself. A security guard stood outside. Sir, the toxicology team is at the gate. Bring them in. Directly here. No stops. Yes, sir. Richard looked down the hall. Victoria stood near the staircase with Malcolm beside her. They were speaking quietly. When she saw Richard, she touched her chest, as if wounded by being excluded. Richard's voice carried. Victoria, Malcolm, remain in the sitting room until I call for you. Victoria came forward. Richard, you can't be serious. I am past serious. You're humiliating me in front of staff. He looked at her for a long second. If humiliation is the worst thing that happens to you today, count yourself blessed. She stopped. Malcolm said, Mr. Whitmore, with respect, this is becoming an emotional reaction. Richard stepped toward him. With respect, Malcolm, if you speak again before I ask you a question, I will have security remove you from my house. Malcolm's face went blank. The toxicology team arrived carrying black cases and wearing plain clothes under medical coats. The lead specialist introduced herself as Dr. Elaine Porter. She was direct, middle-aged, and unimpressed by the mansion. I understand there are concerns about possible contamination of food and medication, she said. Richard pointed to the table. Everything is there. The glass, the carton, the IV bag, the medication vials. My son's blood can be drawn here. Dr. Porter looked at Annie. You're the one who observed the pattern? Annie blinked, surprised to be addressed first. Yes, ma'am. Tell me times, not theories. Annie opened her notebook and read from it. Milk at 7:30. Blue lips within 20 to 30 minutes. Tremor soon after. Fever spike around an hour. Evening medication at 8:04. Fog within minutes. Doctor. Porter listened without interrupting. When Annie finished, Dr. Porter said, Good notes. Dr. Cole looked away. Victoria, standing in the doorway despite Richard's order, gave a soft laugh. Are we now taking medical direction from a caregiver's notebook? Dr. Porter turned to her. We take useful observations from whoever made them. Victoria's smile faded. The team began working. The milk was sealed. The powder residue from the glass was swabbed. The IV bag was photographed, labeled, and tested with a portable kit. Daniel gave blood without complaint, eyes on Annie while she held his free hand. Minutes stretched. Richard stood like stone. Victoria sat in the hallway, too still. Malcolm watched the cases, not Daniel. At last, Dr. Porter looked up from the first rapid panel. "There is an abnormal compound in the milk sample," she said. Richard's face did not move. "What kind?" "I won't name it until full confirmation, but it is not a nutritional supplement. It can affect neurological function and circulation in repeated low doses." Daniel closed his eyes. Annie felt his hand relax a fraction. Dr. Porter moved to the IV report. "And this medication does not match the original administration record provided to us." Dr. Cole whispered, "My God." Richard looked at Victoria. This time she had no tears ready. No one spoke, because the first answer had arrived, and it was worse than grief. It was intention. The first answer did not make the room louder. It made everyone careful. Richard stood near the foot of Daniel's bed, staring at the glass of almond milk sealed inside a clear evidence bag. Dr. Elaine Porter's words had not faded. Not a supplement. Neurological function. Circulation. Repeated low doses. Repeated. That was the word Annie could not stop hearing. Daniel had not been struck down by some mystery illness overnight. He had been led there one morning at a time, one glass at a time, while the people around him called it disease, weakness, confusion. Richard turned slowly toward Victoria. "Tell me what was in that packet." Victoria rose from the hallway chair. "I don't know what that test picked up, but I know what I gave Malcolm. It was a supplement blend. Something to help Daniel's strength." Dr. Porter removed her gloves and looked at her. "Who prescribed it?" Victoria's mouth tightened. "It came recommended." "By whom?" "A wellness consultant." Richard's voice was flat. "Name?" Victoria looked at him, wounded again, but the expression no longer fit her face. "Richard, you're letting them interrogate me like I'm some criminal." "No," he said. "I'm asking my wife a simple question in my son's bedroom." Malcolm stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore handled much of Daniel's nutritional care because you asked the household to support his recovery. There were many recommendations coming in." Richard did not look at him. "I didn't ask you." Malcolm stopped. Dr. Cole stood at the medication table, pale and quiet. For the first time since Annie had entered the house, he did not look like the highest authority in the room. He looked like a man trying to locate the exact moment his certainty had failed him. Dr. Porter turned to him. "Doctor, I need the full medication history, including every change from the last 10 days. Dr. Cole nodded. "Of course, and I need to know who had access to the IV storage. Medical staff, myself, Mr. Reed for transport between the locked cabinet and the patient room, and Mrs. Whitmore occasionally when she assisted with supplies." Richard's eyes moved to Malcolm. "You transported medication?" Malcolm remained composed. "Under Dr. Cole's direction." Dr. Cole looked up. "Under household arrangement. I did not personally instruct you to handle medication unsupervised." The correction landed hard. Victoria moved beside Richard. "This is getting out of hand." Daniel is hearing all of this. Daniel's eyes were open. His skin was still pale, but his mind seemed clearer than before, as if the refusal of the milk had given him a small piece of himself back. "I want to hear," he whispered. Victoria turned to him. "Sweetheart, you need rest." Daniel's gaze slid away from her. "Don't call me that." The room went silent. Richard flinched, not at Daniel's tone, but at the history behind it. How many times had his son tried to pull away? While he explained it as teenage resentment, how many times had Victoria used softness as a cage? Dr. Porter's assistant labeled the blood samples and packed the testing strips. "Preliminary blood work shows signs consistent with exposure," she said. "We'll need lab confirmation, but his symptoms align with what we found in the milk." Richard gripped the bed rail. "Can you treat it? We can support his body and stop further exposure. Depending on the compound, there may be additional treatment. The most important step is removing the source." Annie looked at the milk. Daniel saw her looking and whispered, "Every morning." Richard turned to him. "How long?" Daniel's throat moved. "After the library." Victoria shut her eyes. "Not this again." Richard faced her. "Open them." She did. "What happened in the library?" "Nothing happened." Daniel's hand trembled on the blanket. "Liar." Dr. Cole murmured. Daniel, try to stay calm, but Richard lifted one hand. Let him speak. Daniel took a shallow breath. Annie moved closer, not touching him yet, just near enough for him to know someone was listening. I went in for Mom's book, Daniel said. The green journal. It was in the cabinet by the fireplace. I heard voices. I thought Dad was home. His eyes moved to Malcolm. He was there. Malcolm's face did not change. The boy was feverish that week. I wasn't sick yet, Daniel said. Stronger this time. Not like this. Richard's face darkened. Daniel continued. They were kissing. She saw me. Malcolm grabbed my arm. Hard. He swallowed. She said Dad would never believe me. She said if I tried to ruin his happiness, everyone would see how unstable I was. Victoria stepped toward him. You imagined that because you were upset about the marriage. Daniel's eyes filled. I hated the marriage after I saw you. The words cut through the room with a bluntness no adult could polish. Richard looked away, and Annie saw shame move across his face. Dr. Porter closed her case. Mr. Whitmore, this is now beyond a medical concern. You need law enforcement, and you need the scene preserved. Victoria gave a short laugh. Scene? This is our home. Not if a patient has been deliberately exposed to a harmful substance, Dr. Porter said. Richard pulled out his phone. Victoria's voice sharpened. Richard, think about what you're doing. Police in this house? Reporters will find out. Daniel's name will be everywhere. Your company, the board, the foundation. My son, Richard said, is lying in that bed because someone cared more about appearances than his life. Don't say the word foundation to me. She stared at him as if she no longer recognized the man she had married. Before Richard could dial, Malcolm spoke. Sir, perhaps it would be prudent to speak privately first. Accusations made in crisis can have consequences. Richard looked at him. You're right. Malcolm's shoulders eased. Then Richard said, So stand where I can see you while I make the call. The ease vanished. Richard called his private attorney first, but not the one Victoria expected. He asked for a criminal defense and evidence preservation specialist, someone outside the Whitmore family office. Then he called the police contact his attorney gave him. His voice did not rise. That made it worse. It had the calm of a man whose rage had finally found a purpose. When he hung up, Victoria had gone pale. Dr. Cole cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, I need to say something. Richard's eyes moved to him. I failed to question a pattern I should have questioned, the doctor said. I relied on information coming through channels I believed were trustworthy. That was an error. Victoria snapped. Don't you dare try to save yourself by feeding this hysteria. Dr. Cole looked at her. Mrs. Whitmore, the milk tested positive. For something preliminary. The IV medication does not match the original record. Because Daniel's condition changed. Because someone influenced the change, Annie said. Victoria turned on her. You should be very careful. Richard stepped between them. No. You should. Annie felt the power of that sentence settle over the room. Not protection exactly. Not yet trust without limits. But a line Victoria could no longer cross easily. Dr. Porter prepared to leave samples with sealed documentation. Nothing else goes into him until confirmed. Not food. Not drink. Not medication. Use bottled water opened in this room. Basic supportive care only until the hospital toxicology team coordinates with me. Richard nodded. He stays here? For now, moving him may stress him, but he needs secure medical oversight. I'll arrange it. Daniel whispered, Dad. Richard was at his side instantly. Daniel looked exhausted, but his eyes were clearer. Don't let her take me away. I won't. She said there was a place. A private center. Richard's head turned slowly toward Victoria. Victoria's lips parted. I was trying to protect him from public shame. Annie could not stop herself, or hide him where no one would listen. Victoria's eyes burned. You know nothing about this family. No, Annie said. But I know when a sick person is afraid of the people calling it care. Mrs. Grace, still near the hall, lowered her eyes, and Annie knew the older woman had heard the truth of that sentence in more than one room in her life. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a house preparing for a storm. Security was ordered to lock external exits, not to trap guests this time, but to preserve evidence. Staff were told to remain available. Dr. Porter's samples were photographed. The almond milk carton, the glass, the packet residue, the IV bag, and the medication records were sealed in separate bags. Richard ordered Malcolm to hand over the keys to the medication cabinet. Malcolm hesitated. Richard held out his hand. Now, Malcolm placed the key ring in his palm. Among the keys was one silver key Annie had seen earlier, the one that seemed to follow him through every hallway like a badge of ownership. Richard looked at it, then at Malcolm. "You've had too much access to my son." Malcolm said nothing. Victoria sat down slowly, no tears now. She watched everyone move around her, and for the first time, she looked less like the lady of the house than someone calculating exits. Annie stayed beside Daniel. He had drifted into a lighter sleep, his breathing uneven but less strained. His hand rested near hers. She did not take it, but when his fingers shifted, she let them touch her sleeve again. Richard noticed. He came around the bed and stood near Annie. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally he said, "Why did you watch the milk?" Annie kept her voice low. "Because he did." Richard looked at his son. Annie continued. "Everybody watched the fever, the tremors, the confusion. But Daniel watched the thing that came before." Richard closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet, though no tears fell. "I should have listened to him." Annie did not comfort him. It was not her place to absolve a father while his son lay poisoned in front of them, so she said the only thing that mattered. "You can listen now." Richard nodded once. From downstairs came the sound of tires on gravel. Then another vehicle behind it. Police? Or lawyers? Or both? Victoria heard it too. Her hands closed around the arms of the chair. Daniel stirred, his lips moving around a word Annie could not hear. She bent closer. "What is it?" His eyes opened just a slit. "Library," he breathed. Annie looked at Richard. "There may be proof there." Malcolm's head lifted. Victoria stood too quickly. "He is confused again," but this time, no one moved toward her. No one accepted the explanation because she had spoken it gently. No one let the word confusion bury Daniel's warning. Richard turned toward the hallway. "Seal the West Library," he said, and across the room, Annie saw Malcolm's face change. The order to seal the West Library moved through the house faster than footsteps. A security guard stationed himself outside the double doors. Another was sent to the rear hall. Richard told everyone in the family rooms to remain where they were until police arrived. His voice did not rise, but staff obeyed as if it had. For years, the Whitmore house had answered to money, rank, and routine. Now it answered to fear. Victoria stood near Daniel's doorway, arms folded, her face pale but controlled. "Richard, you're turning our home into a crime scene because a sick boy mumbled one word." Richard looked at her, a sick boy who was right about the milk. She flinched, then recovered. "Preliminary tests. That's all they are." Dr. Cole, standing beside the medication table, said quietly, "Preliminary tests don't explain themselves into existence." Victoria turned on him. "You're awfully brave now that someone else has given you permission." The doctor said nothing. Shame had made him smaller, but not useless. He stayed near Daniel's chart, guarding it now as if late honesty could still matter. Annie remained at Daniel's bedside. His eyes were closed, but his breathing had steadied since no one had forced milk or medicine into him. She kept her notebook on her lap, writing only what happened, not what she feared. Time police were called. Time West Library sealed. Milk and IV secured. Daniel responsive to father. She had learned that facts could stand straighter than anger. Mrs. Grace appeared in the hall with a blanket folded over one arm. "He might get cold," she said. Richard nodded without looking away from Victoria. "Thank you, Grace." Grace came in and laid the blanket near Daniel's feet. When she passed Annie, she murmured, "Keep your phone close." Annie looked up. Grace's face remained calm. "Some folks don't fall alone." Before Annie could answer, Malcolm entered with one of the security guards behind him. "Mr. Whitmore, may I speak with you privately?" "No." Malcolm's mouth tightened. "It concerns household records." "Then say it in the room." Victoria sat down slowly, watching him. Malcolm glanced at Annie. "Perhaps not in front of temporary staff." Richard's gaze hardened. The temporary staff noticed what everyone else missed. "Speak." A small silence followed. Malcolm clasped his hands behind his back. I believe we should check her belongings. Annie felt the room tilt. Richard frowned. Whose belongings? Malcolm looked directly at her. Miss Williams, Victoria whispered. Malcolm, but Annie heard no surprise in it. Only performance. Malcolm continued. If someone introduced a substance into Daniel's milk, we cannot assume it began with long-term household members. Miss Williams arrived shortly before the accusation. She had private access to the patient. She hid in the pantry. She recorded without permission. And she has been keeping unauthorized notes. Annie stood. You watched Mrs. Whitmore hand you the packet. You recorded an angle, Malcolm said, not a full context. Dr. Cole said, the packet was in your possession. For preparation, Malcolm replied. As instructed, I was told it was nutritional. Richard's eyes moved between them. And now you think Annie brought poison into my house? I think desperation has many faces, Malcolm said. A young caregiver from an agency, with financial need, placed in the home of one of the wealthiest families in Illinois. If she creates a crisis and then solves it, she becomes valuable, maybe even famous. Annie stared at him. The accusation was so clean, so ready, it did not sound born in the moment. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh my God. Richard turned to her. Don't. She lowered her hand, tears gathering again. I don't want to believe that of her. I truly don't. But Richard, how did she know to watch the milk? How did she know where to stand? Why was she filming before anything happened? Annie's voice came out tight, because Daniel was scared. Victoria shook her head. Daniel is confused. No, Richard said. The word stopped her, but not Malcolm. Then allow the search, Malcolm said. If she has nothing to hide, it clears her. Annie almost laughed. She had heard that sentence in stores, at school, on sidewalks, in places where people wanted permission to treat suspicion like evidence. Richard looked at her. Annie? She felt the unfairness of it burn behind her eyes. If she refused, she looked guilty. If she agreed, they took another piece of her dignity. Search it, she said, but not him alone. Richard nodded to the security guard. You and Mrs. Grace. Bring her bag here. No one touches it outside this room. Malcolm's face barely moved, but Annie saw the annoyance. Grace left with the guard. The minutes that followed were worse than shouting. Daniel slept. Dr. Cole kept checking the same chart. Victoria sat with her hands folded, looking like a woman praying for truth while waiting for a lie to bloom. When Grace returned, she carried Annie's backpack by the top handle, jaw tight. The security guard held a clear plastic pouch. I found these in the outer compartment, he said. Annie looked at the pouch and went cold. Inside were a small roll of cash, a folded copy of Daniel's medication schedule, and a tiny vial with white powder clinging to the bottom. That's not mine, she said. Victoria closed her eyes. Lord help us. Annie took a step back. I've never seen that. Malcolm's voice was quiet. No one ever has, until they're caught. Richard looked at the pouch as if it might bite him. His face did not accuse her yet, but doubt crossed it. And that hurt more than Annie expected. Grace spoke sharply. That was not in her bag when she came through the kitchen. Malcolm turned. You inspected her bag? No. I saw her pull out that phone and nothing else. That compartment was flat. That is hardly evidence. And your word is? Grace shot back. Victoria stood. This fighting is helping no one. Richard, call the police upstairs and let them handle it. Until then, she should not be near Daniel. Daniel stirred at the sound of Annie's chair moving. His eyes opened, unfocused. Annie? She moved toward him, but Malcolm stepped slightly into her path. Richard saw it. Move. Malcolm did, though slowly. Annie reached the bedside. Daniel's eyes found her. Don't go. Victoria's voice softened. Daniel, sweetheart. He flinched. No. Richard watched his son's hand reach weakly toward Annie. The boy did not reach for Victoria. Not for Dr. Cole. Not even for his father in that moment. Richard looked at the plastic pouch again. Annie, did you put that in your bag? No, sir. Did anyone have access to it? It was in the staff room while I checked Daniel this morning. Then in the kitchen when I went into the pantry. I didn't keep it on me every second. Malcolm said. Convenient. Annie turned to him. You knew where it was. So did half the staff. Grace's eyes narrowed. Most staff don't carry keys to every room. The police arrived before Malcolm could answer. 2 detectives came upstairs with a uniformed officer behind them. Detective Laura Bennett introduced herself. Calm and direct. Her partner, Detective Shaw, began noting who stood where. Richard gave a brief summary, his voice controlled until he mentioned Daniel. Bennett looked at the evidence bags on the table, then at the pouch from Annie's backpack. Who found this? The security guard answered. I did, ma'am. Mrs. Grace was present. Who had access to the bag before the search? Annie started to answer, but Malcolm cut in. Multiple staff members may have passed the room. Detective Bennett looked at him. I didn't ask what may have happened. I asked who had access. That shut him down for a beat. Victoria moved closer to Richard. Detective, we are all exhausted. My stepson is very ill, and this girl has stirred up horrible accusations. Bennett looked at Annie. This girl has a name? Annie straightened. Annie Williams. The detective nodded once. Then we'll use it. For the first time since the pouch appeared, Annie felt air enter her lungs. Dr. Porter's preliminary report was handed over. Dr. Cole provided medication records. The detective sealed the pouch without accepting anyone's conclusion about it. Bennett ordered that no one leave the property until initial statements were taken. Victoria did not like that. Are we being detained? You're being asked to remain available during an active investigation involving possible poisoning, Bennett said. You may call counsel. Richard said, no one leaves. Bennett glanced at him. Mr. Whitmore. With respect. This is my scene now. Richard paused, then nodded. Understood. That simple correction shifted the room again. Money still mattered here, but it no longer ruled alone. Detective Shaw asked about the West Library. Richard explained Daniel's statement. Victoria called it confusion. Daniel, hearing her voice, opened his eyes and whispered, I saw you. No one moved. Bennett stepped closer to the bed. Daniel, I'm Detective Bennett. I won't push you right now, but I need to ask one thing. Do you feel safe with everyone in this room? Daniel's gaze moved slowly from face to face. His eyes passed over his father with pain, Dr. Cole with uncertainty, Malcolm with fear, Victoria with something close to dread. Then they stopped on Annie. With her, he whispered. Victoria's face tightened. He barely knows her. Bennett looked at Annie, then at Daniel's hand resting against her sleeve. Sometimes people know who listened. Richard turned away, pressing his fist to his mouth. Malcolm stood still, but a thin line of sweat had appeared near his temple. Detective Bennett ordered the West Library sealed until the crime scene unit could process it. She also requested all security footage from the past month. Malcolm said, I can arrange that. Bennett looked at him. No, you can tell my officer where the system is. He'll arrange it. Annie saw his eyes flick toward Victoria. It was quick, too quick for most people, but Richard saw it too. And for the first time since Annie had entered the Whitmore house, Malcolm Reed looked less like a man protecting order and more like a man watching the walls begin to close. Detective Bennett moved everyone out of Daniel's bedroom except Richard, Dr. Cole, Annie, and one uniformed officer by the door. Victoria objected first, then Malcolm, but Bennett did not argue. She only repeated the order in the same flat voice until they obeyed. Daniel watched them leave. His eyes stayed open longer than they had all morning. The absence of Victoria changed him. His breathing was still weak, his skin still pale, but some tightness had gone from his face. Richard noticed. That seemed to hurt him more than the test results. He sat beside the bed and took Daniel's hand. She's gone for now. Daniel stared at the ceiling. She always comes back. Not this time. You said that before. Richard lowered his head. Annie looked down at her notebook, pretending not to hear, but the words filled the room. Dr. Cole checked Daniel's pulse. Try not to exhaust yourself. The detectives can speak to you later. Daniel turned his face away from him. You gave me the medicine. Dr. Cole's hand froze. Annie saw the sentence hit him. Not like an accusation shouted in anger, but worse, like a fact placed gently on a table. The doctor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Yes, he said. I did. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. I told you it made me foggy. I know. You said I was confused. Dr. Cole looked at Richard, then back at Daniel. For once, there was no lecture waiting behind his teeth. I was wrong to dismiss you. Daniel closed his eyes. Everybody was. Richard's fingers tightened around his son's hand. Danny. Daniel pulled weakly away. Richard let him. That small surrender changed the room. Richard Whitmore, who had tried to hold his son to life with force, finally understood he could not hold Daniel's trust the same way. Detective Bennett returned a few minutes later with a small recorder in her hand. Daniel, I'm going to ask only what you feel able to answer. You can stop at any time. Your doctor is here, and so is your father. Is it all right if Annie stays? Daniel's eyes moved to Annie. Yes. Bennett nodded to Annie, then pulled a chair closer. You mentioned the West Library. Can you tell me what happened there? Daniel swallowed. Annie poured water from a sealed bottle into a clean cup, then held the straw while he took a small sip. Richard watched the simple act with a kind of helpless gratitude. As if he had forgotten care could be quiet, Daniel breathed out. It was after dinner, maybe 6 weeks ago. Dad was in New York. Victoria said she had a headache and went upstairs. Malcolm was supposed to lock the back doors. Were you ill then? Bennett asked. Tired, not sick like now. What took you to the library? My mom's journal. His eyes shifted toward Richard. The green one. Richard nodded slowly. Emily's journal. She kept it in the cabinet. I wanted to read something she wrote about college, Daniel said. I'd been thinking about deferring a year. Dad didn't like that. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Daniel continued. I heard voices before I opened the door. I thought maybe Dad came home early. Then I saw them. Bennett's tone stayed gentle. Victoria and Malcolm? Daniel nodded. What were they doing? He looked embarrassed, even sick as he was. They were kissing. More than kissing. She had her hands on his shirt. He was laughing. I dropped the book. They saw me. Richard's face had gone gray. What happened then? Bennett asked. Malcolm grabbed my arm. Victoria told him to let go because he'd leave bruises. Daniel's mouth trembled. She wasn't scared for me. She was scared someone would see. Annie's grip tightened on the cup. What did Victoria say to you? Bennett asked. Daniel's eyes filled again. She said I was lonely. That grief makes people imagine things. She said if I told Dad, he'd think I was trying to punish him for remarrying. Richard whispered, God. Daniel did not look at him. I told Dad anyway. Richard looked up sharply. You said you didn't like her. You said she was fake. You said Malcolm was always near her. I was trying. Daniel's voice broke. Every time I tried to say the real thing, she was there. Or he was there. Then I got worse. My hands started shaking. I'd forget what I was saying halfway through. You looked at me like... He stopped. Like what? Richard asked. Though he seemed afraid of the answer, Daniel turned his head toward him. Like you were sorry I had become difficult. Richard bent forward as if struck in the chest. No one spoke for several seconds. Bennett let the silence sit, then asked, After the library, did anything change with your food or medicine? The milk, Daniel said. Before that, I drank it sometimes. After that, every morning. Victoria said dairy made inflammation worse, and almond milk was gentler. She brought it herself at first, then Malcolm did. If I refused, she cried. If Dad was there, he'd ask me to try. Richard covered his mouth with one hand. She always made it about love, Daniel said. Like I was hurting her by not drinking it. Annie thought of Victoria's soft voice over the glass. Sweetheart, just a little, Bennett asked. And the medication? Daniel's brow tightened. Night medicine changed. I don't know names. It made everything far away. I'd wake up and not remember hours. Sometimes I heard them talking, but I couldn't move enough to answer. Do you remember what they said? Daniel's eyes moved to the door. Once Malcolm said I was almost there. Victoria said not yet. She said Dad needed to see me decline slowly, so he'd accept the private center. Richard stood. Private center? Daniel looked at him. She said you signed papers. I signed an inquiry, Richard said. Not admission. She told me it was only in case you needed specialized care. Bennett made a note. We'll need those documents. Richard nodded, but his eyes stayed on Daniel. Why didn't you tell me she said that? Daniel's face twisted with pain. I did. You told me not to upset myself. Richard looked away. For years, he had built towers, bought land, negotiated with men who used silence as a weapon. Yet he had missed silence in his own son because it came wrapped in fever and exhaustion. Dr. Cole checked Daniel's oxygen and spoke quietly. He needs rest soon. Bennett nodded. Almost done. She leaned closer. Daniel, earlier you said you felt safe with Annie. Why? Daniel looked at Annie. She didn't tell me what I meant. She asked. Annie felt tears sting her eyes but held them back. Richard looked at her too, then down at the old notebook in her lap. Bennett stopped the recorder. That's enough for now. As she rose, the uniformed officer at the door stepped in. Detective, we have an issue with the security footage. Bennett turned. What issue? The officer glanced at Richard. The main system shows a data gap on the night Daniel described. West Library camera, rear hall, and part of the staircase. All missing. Richard's jaw tightened. Who has access? The officer checked his notes. House manager has administrator privileges. Everyone understood before Malcolm's name was spoken. Bennett looked toward the hall. Where is Mr. Reed? The officer hesitated. In the sitting room with Mrs. Whitmore. Keep them there. Annie glanced at Daniel. His eyes were closing, but his fingers moved weakly toward her sleeve again. She sat beside him. Rest. You said enough. Daniel whispered. No proof. Annie thought of Mrs. Grace, of the way she moved through the house with towels she did not need, seeing what others ignored. Maybe not in the main system. Richard heard her. What does that mean? Annie hesitated. It was not her secret to tell, but Daniel had just given everything he had. Mrs. Grace said Daniel's mother kept this house human, Annie said. People like that usually don't trust one lock on an important door. Richard stared at her, then understood. A backup. Dr. Cole looked toward the hall. Bennett opened the bedroom door. At the far end, Mrs. Grace stood with a folded blanket in her arms, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to be noticed. Bennett asked, Mrs. Grace, do you know whether this house has a backup security system? Grace's eyes moved to Richard first, not asking permission, measuring whether he deserved the answer. Then she said, Mrs. Emily had one installed years ago, after a staff member was blamed for jewelry that turned up in a guest's purse. She said no working person should lose a livelihood because rich people like convenient stories. Richard's face changed at the sound of his late wife's name. Where? Bennett asked. Grace adjusted the blanket under her arm. Old laundry office, behind the breaker panel. Malcolm appeared in the hall before anyone called him. That system was decommissioned. Grace looked at him. Then you won't mind if they check. For a moment, Malcolm had no answer. Victoria stepped out behind him, her face tight. Richard, this is absurd. You're letting servants and strangers tear apart your home. Richard looked at Daniel asleep in the bed, then at Annie, then at Mrs. Grace. No, he said. I'm letting the people I ignored tell me where to look. Detective Bennett turned to the officer. Seal the laundry office. Mr. Reed doesn't go near it. Malcolm's calm finally slipped. It was only a second, but Annie saw it. So did Richard. Detective Bennett did not let Malcolm lead the way. She sent the uniformed officer first, then followed with Richard, Mrs. Grace, Annie, and Dr. Cole. Victoria tried to come too, insisting she had every right to know what was happening in her own home, but Bennett stopped her at the top of the stairs. You'll remain in the sitting room, the detective said. Victoria's face tightened. Am I under arrest? Not yet. Those two words were plain enough to silence the hall. Richard paused as if he might speak to her. But then Daniel's weak voice came back to him, the words still raw. You didn't believe me. He turned and followed Bennett down the back stairs. The old laundry office sat below the main floor, tucked behind a corridor most guests would never see. The air changed down there. Upstairs smelled of polished wood, flowers, and expensive soap. Downstairs smelled of detergent, warm pipes, cardboard boxes, and the kind of work that kept beautiful houses from looking lived in. Annie felt more at ease there than she had anywhere else in the mansion. Mrs. Grace moved slower than the others. one hand on the wall as she descended. Richard noticed and offered his arm. She looked at him for a moment before taking it. "Your wife used to come down here," she said. Richard's face softened. "Emily?" Grace nodded. "She said a house that hides its working rooms is usually hiding its conscience too." Richard said nothing, but the words stayed with him. The laundry office was small, with an old metal desk, a chair with cracked vinyl, shelves of cleaning logs, and a breaker panel mounted on the back wall. A calendar from 2 years ago still hung beside a corkboard. The place looked forgotten, which made it useful. The officer checked the room first, then nodded. "Clear." Bennett turned to Grace. "Show me." Grace stepped to the breaker panel and pointed to 2 screws on the lower right corner. "That panel's false. Mrs. Emily had it done after the Fleming necklace mess." Richard frowned. "I remember the necklace. I didn't know about this. You weren't home much then," Grace said, not unkindly. The officer removed the screws and lifted the panel. Behind it was a narrow compartment holding a small backup drive unit, dusty but powered by a separate line. A tiny green light blinked in the dark. Dr. Cole exhaled. "It's still running." Bennett slipped on gloves. "Nobody touches anything until crime scene techs document it." She took photos, then let the officer remove the unit carefully. "Can we view footage here?" "There's an old monitor in the cabinet," Grace said. "If Malcolm didn't toss it, he didn't toss anything he didn't think mattered," Annie murmured. Richard looked at her, and this time there was no doubt in his eyes, only grim understanding. The monitor flickered to life after 2 tries. The backup system was crude compared to the main security room, but it had dates, timestamps, and camera labels. West Library, Rear Hall, East Stair, Service Corridor. Bennett searched the date Daniel had given. The main system had shown a gap. The backup did not. The room seemed to shrink around the screen. At first, there was only the library, still and dim, lit by 2 lamps near the fireplace. Shelves lined the walls. A cabinet stood open. Then Daniel appeared on the footage, healthier than he was now, wearing sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt. His hair messy, his movements tired but steady. He crossed to the cabinet and reached inside. Annie heard Richard breathe in sharply. "That was before he got bad," he whispered. On the screen, Daniel froze. He turned toward the far side of the library. Victoria stepped into view. Malcolm followed. There was no sound, but the body language needed none. Victoria was too close to him. Malcolm touched her waist. She did not move away. Then he kissed her, and she let him. Richard's hand braced against the desk. Daniel on the screen dropped the green journal. Victoria jerked back. Malcolm turned. For a few seconds, all 3 stood frozen. Then Malcolm crossed the room quickly and grabbed Daniel by the arm. Richard moved toward the monitor as if he could reach through time and pull his son away. "Don't," he whispered, but the old footage kept playing. Victoria approached Daniel. She pointed a finger at his chest. Her face was no longer soft. Malcolm still held Daniel's arm. Daniel tried to pull free. Malcolm shook him once, not hard enough to throw him down, but hard enough that everyone in the laundry office saw the threat. Grace made a sound low in her throat. "That poor boy," Bennett said. "Record this segment." The officer connected a drive and copied the file. The footage continued. Daniel left the library first, fast and shaken. Victoria stood with Malcolm for a moment. She pressed both hands to her face, then dropped them. Malcolm spoke. She shook her head. Then she said something slowly, her lips clear enough that Annie, though no expert, understood the shape of one word. "Confused." Bennett leaned closer. "Go forward." The next clip showed the kitchen the following morning. Victoria entered before breakfast. Malcolm brought a carton of almond milk. There was no packet visible yet, but Victoria stood close, watching him prepare the glass herself. Daniel appeared later at the edge of the frame, Richard beside him. Victoria offered the milk. Daniel refused. Richard placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking gently. Daniel drank. Richard turned away from the monitor. Annie did not soften the truth for him. He had to see it whole. Bennett advanced through the days. Pattern after pattern appeared. Victoria or Malcolm handled the milk. Daniel resisted. Richard persuaded him when present. Later clips showed Malcolm entering the medical supply room after midnight. Another showed him carrying a small box toward Daniel's room. Another showed Victoria outside the door, waiting. Dr. Cole's face tightened. That supply room was supposed to be locked. Richard looked at him. With Malcolm's key? The doctor had no answer. Then the screen showed something that made Annie go cold. The staff room. Annie's backpack sat on a chair near the foot of the narrow bed. Malcolm entered alone. He closed the door behind him, moved straight to the bag, and unzipped the outer pocket. He placed something inside. A vial, paper, cash. Grace slapped her hand against the desk. There it is. Richard's face changed. He looked at Annie, and the regret in his eyes was immediate. Annie. She kept her voice steady. I told you it wasn't mine. I know that now. No, she said. Not harshly, but because truth mattered. You know it because a camera said it. The words hit him. He accepted them without defense. Bennett copied the clip. That clears the planted evidence. Mr. Reed is now tied to tampering and possible poisoning. Annie looked at the screen, then at the little blinking green light in the hidden compartment. Daniel's mother had been gone for years, yet something she left behind had protected him when the living failed. Richard seemed to think the same thing. His hand touched the edge of the desk. Emily did this. Grace nodded. She knew beautiful rooms don't keep people honest. From upstairs came a shout. Everyone turned. A second shout followed, sharper this time, a guard's voice. Then feet on the stairs. The uniformed officer reached for his radio, but before he could speak, another guard appeared at the laundry office door, breathing hard. Detective, Mr. Reed is gone. Richard's head snapped up. Gone? He was in the sitting room with Mrs. Whitmore. She said she felt faint, asked for water. When I turned to call for help, Reed slipped through the rear service hall. We think he's heading toward the garage. Bennett's face hardened. Lock down the exits. Now. Annie's stomach dropped. Daniel. Richard was already moving. They ran back through the service corridor. Annie behind Bennett and Richard. Grace calling after them to be careful. The house that had been quiet all day now rang with alarms and voices. Somewhere above, Victoria was crying loudly enough for everyone to hear. She helped him, Richard said. Bennett spoke into her radio. All units, suspect Malcolm Reed fleeing toward garage or lower service exit. Do not allow access to vehicles. Annie reached Daniel's room a few steps after Richard. Daniel was awake, eyes wide, breathing fast. Dr. Cole, who had fallen behind, came in and checked the monitor. He heard the alarm, the doctor said. Pulse is climbing. Annie went to the bedside. Daniel, look at me. They found it. His eyes locked on hers. Library? Yes. The backup footage. You told the truth. He stared at her as if the words had to cross a long distance before he could believe them. Then his face crumpled. He did not sob. He was too weak. But tears filled his eyes and ran quietly down both sides of his face. Richard sat beside him. Danny, I'm sorry. Daniel looked at his father, and this time he did not turn away. You saw? Richard nodded. I saw. The milk? I saw enough. Daniel shut his eyes. I wasn't crazy. Richard took his son's hand with both of his. No, you were never crazy. In the hall, Victoria's voice rose. Richard, please. Malcolm panicked because you frightened him. That doesn't mean... Bennett cut her off. Mrs. Whitmore. Sit down. But Victoria was no longer performing grief for a room that believed her. Her voice had edges now. This is my home. Richard stood and walked to the doorway. No, he said. It was my son's home before you turned it into a place he was afraid to sleep. Victoria looked at him, and for the first time she did not have a ready answer. The radio on Bennett's shoulder crackled. Suspect located near service garage. He's resisting. Another burst of static. Then, suspect in custody. Malcolm's capture should have ended the tension, but Annie felt the opposite. A trapped man might talk. A trapped woman might do worse. Victoria heard the radio too. Her face went still. Bennett noticed. Mrs. Whitmore, put your hands where I can see them. Victoria laughed once. You can't be serious. Hands. Slowly, Victoria raised them. Behind Annie, Daniel whispered. She'll lie. Annie looked at Richard, then at Detective Bennett, then at the sealed evidence bags on the table. Maybe, Annie said. but now she has to lie against the truth. Malcolm Reed was brought back through the service hallway with one wrist cuffed and blood at the corner of his mouth. He had not made it to the garage. 2 officers had found him near the lower exit, trying to force open a maintenance door that led toward the boathouse path. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. The silver key ring that had once made him look like the keeper of the house now hung in an evidence bag from Detective Shaw's hand. Victoria watched from the sitting room doorway as they led him past. She did not cry out. She did not ask if he was hurt. She only looked at him once, quick and cold, as if he had become a broken tool. Malcolm saw that look. Something in his face changed. Detective Bennett noticed it too. "Mr. Reed, you can speak now, or you can wait for counsel. Your choice." Malcolm's eyes went to Richard, then Victoria, then the floor. "I want a lawyer." Victoria exhaled, almost relieved. Bennett nodded. "That is your right." Richard stepped toward him. "Did you poison my son?" Malcolm looked up. His lips parted, but Bennett moved between them. "Mr. Whitmore, don't." Richard stopped, shaking with the effort it took not to put his hands on the man. From Daniel's room came a cough, weak but sharp enough to pull Annie's attention back. She hurried to the bedside. Daniel's skin was damp, his breathing uneven again. Dr. Cole checked the monitor. "Stress response," he said. "His pulse is climbing." Daniel whispered. "Malcolm?" "In custody," Annie said. His eyes moved toward the door. "Victoria?" Annie did not answer quickly enough. Daniel understood. "She's still here." Richard came back into the room and heard him. "She is not coming near you." Daniel looked at his father. "You said that before." The words hit Richard in full view of everyone. He did not defend himself. He sat beside the bed and lowered his voice. "You're right, I did, and I failed you." Daniel's eyes filled, but he looked away. Annie could feel the room holding its breath. Some apologies asked for comfort before they had earned it. Richard seemed to know that. He did not reach for Daniel's hand this time. "I won't ask you to forgive me today," he said. "I'm just going to keep her away from you." Daniel's jaw trembled. "You believed her because she cried." Richard closed his eyes. Dr. Cole turned slightly, giving father and son as much privacy as the room allowed. Detective Bennett waited near the door, expression unreadable. Richard finally said, "Yes, she always cried when I told the truth. I know that now." Daniel's voice weakened. "That doesn't help before." "No," Richard said. "It doesn't." Annie looked down at her notebook because the moment felt too raw to witness. She had seen poverty hurt people, sickness hurt people, strangers hurt people, but there was a different wound in a child realizing the parent who loved him had still failed to protect him. Detective Shaw stepped into the doorway. "Bennett, we need you." Bennett looked at Richard. "Stay here. No private conversations with Mrs. Whitmore." Richard nodded. Bennett and Shaw moved into the hall. Annie could hear only pieces. Phone records, message to Cole's assistant, deleted from main system. Then Victoria's voice cut through, sharp now. "I am done being treated like a suspect in my own home. My attorney will destroy this." Bennett answered. "Your attorney can meet us at the station if this goes where it appears to be going. You have no proof I harmed Daniel." Annie stepped to the doorway before she realized she had moved. Victoria stood in the hall, arms folded, no trace of tears left. "Mrs." Grace stood near the wall, watching her with the steady sadness of someone who had known this day would come. Victoria saw Annie and smiled. "There she is," she said. "The little hero." Richard rose. "Don't speak to her." Victoria ignored him. "You must be enjoying this. A few days in this house and suddenly everyone listens when you breathe." Annie felt heat climb her neck. She wanted to stay silent. She knew silence was safer. But Daniel was behind her, poisoned into doubt. "Mrs." Grace was beside her, old enough to have swallowed a lifetime of insults, and Victoria still thought shame could put everyone back in place. "I'm not enjoying anything," Annie said. "Your stepson is sick because people who should have protected him cared more about controlling him." Victoria's smile thinned. "You know nothing about raising a family." "No," Annie said. "But I know when someone calls control love." For 1 second, Victoria looked as if she might strike her. Richard stepped forward, but Detective Bennett raised a hand. Mrs. Whitmore, Bennett said. Where is your phone? With my purse. Where is your purse? In the sitting room. Shaw came back holding a cream leather handbag in a gloved hand. Found it. Victoria's posture changed. Just slightly. Bennett noticed. Passcode? I don't consent to a search. We'll get a warrant. Then get one. Shaw held up another evidence bag. Inside was a folded paper taken from Malcolm's jacket. We also found this on Reed. Looks like an address for a private neurological care facility in Wisconsin, along with a transfer time for tomorrow morning. Richard's face hardened. Tomorrow? Victoria said quickly. It was a contingency plan. Daniel needs peace. Daniel called from inside the room, voice weak but clear. No, I don't. Everyone turned. Annie hurried back to his side, but Daniel was trying to push himself up. Dr. Cole reached to stop him. Daniel, lean back. No. His breath shook. I want her to hear me. Richard moved beside him. You don't have to do this. Daniel looked at his father. I do. Because when I whispered, nobody heard. That silenced Richard. Annie adjusted the pillows so Daniel could sit a little higher. His face went whiter with the effort, but his eyes fixed on Victoria in the hallway. You told me Dad would be ashamed of me, Daniel said. Victoria's voice softened instantly. Daniel, you're confused again. No. His hand gripped the blanket. You said if I kept talking about the library, Dad would send me away. You said people would think grief made me unstable. Then the milk started every morning. Then the medicine at night. Then I couldn't finish sentences. Daniel, Victoria said, I loved you. You loved that I was too weak to talk. The sentence struck harder than shouting could have. Mrs. Grace pressed a hand to her chest. Richard's face twisted, but he stayed silent. He let Daniel speak. Victoria looked around the hall and seemed to understand she no longer owned the room. This is cruel, she said, but her voice lacked its old power. Detective Bennett stepped closer. Mrs. Whitmore, did you arrange Daniel's transfer to that facility? I made inquiries. Did Mr. Whitmore approve the transfer time? Victoria hesitated. He knew we were considering options. That wasn't the question. Richard answered for her. I did not approve a transfer. Bennett nodded to Shaw. Add that. Malcolm's voice came from farther down the hall. She told me he signed. 2 officers turned. Malcolm stood near the stair landing, still cuffed, guarded but listening. His face had lost its polish. He looked at Victoria now with something close to hatred. Victoria spun toward him. Shut up. Bennett walked to him. You invoked counsel. Malcolm swallowed. I changed my mind. Victoria went still. Bennett studied him. You understand you have the right to remain silent. I understand. Then speak carefully. Malcolm looked at Richard. I didn't plan it at first. Victoria laughed once. Pathetic. His eyes snapped to her. You said it wouldn't kill him. Richard moved so fast Annie thought he might cross the hall, but the officer blocked him. Malcolm continued, words spilling now. She said just enough to make him unreliable. Enough that if he talked about the library, no one would take it seriously. She handled the powder. I put it in the milk. She pushed the medication change. I made the calls. Victoria's face had gone white. He's lying to save himself. Malcolm looked at Bennett. Check the service pantry. Back shelf. Flower bin no one uses. There are packets there. And a burner phone behind the loose tile under the sink. Bennett signaled Shaw. Go. Victoria whispered. Malcolm. He turned to her. You looked at me like I was trash when they dragged me in. You are trash, she said too quickly, too honestly. There it was, the mask gone. Richard heard it. Annie saw the last of his doubt die. Daniel sank back against the pillows, exhausted. Annie supported his shoulder while Dr. Cole checked his pulse. You did enough, Annie whispered. Daniel's eyes stayed on his father. Believe me now? Richard came to the bed. This time Daniel did not turn away when he took his hand. Yes, Richard said, and I should have believed you before the proof. A few minutes later, Shaw returned with 2 evidence bags. One held several white packets. The other held a cheap black phone. Victoria sat down slowly in the hall chair. Detective Bennett looked at her. Victoria Whitmore, stand up. Victoria stared at Richard. You're going to let them do this? Richard's voice was low. You did this. Bennett moved in. You are under arrest on suspicion of poisoning, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempted unlawful confinement of a vulnerable patient. You have the right to remain silent." As the cuffs closed around Victoria's wrists, she looked past Richard, past the detectives, straight at Annie. "This doesn't make you one of them," she said. Annie held her gaze. "I never wanted to be one of you." Victoria was led down the hallway with Malcolm behind her, both of them stripped of the quiet power they had used to poison a boy in his own bedroom. When the front door opened downstairs, cold air moved through the house. Daniel closed his eyes and breathed as if the air had finally reached him. Richard sat beside him, bowed over his son's hand. Mrs. Gray stood at the doorway, tears shining but not falling. Dr. Cole looked at Annie. "I owe you an apology." Annie glanced at Daniel, then at the sealed milk on the table. "Not yet," she said. "First help him get better." The house did not feel safer after the police cars left. It felt emptied. For months, Danger had worn perfume, carried trays, answered doors, and moved through polished rooms as if it belonged there. Now Victoria and Malcolm were gone, but the spaces they had touched remained. The kitchen still held the counter where the milk had been prepared. The West Library still held the memory of Daniel dropping his mother's journal. Daniel's bedroom still smelled of medicine and fear. Dr. Cole worked without complaint now. He spoke less, checked more, and questioned everything before it reached Daniel. "Doctor," Porter coordinated with the hospital toxicology unit by phone, confirming the compound found in Daniel's blood matched the residue in the milk packets. It was not designed to kill quickly. That was what made Richard go quiet when he heard it. "A slow exposure," Dr. Porter said from the speakerphone. "Low enough to confuse diagnosis, repeated often enough to create serious symptoms." Richard stood by the window, one hand pressed against the frame, so he suffered because it was planned carefully. "Yes," Dr. Porter said, "that is the medical reality." No one softened it. Daniel slept through most of the afternoon. Without the milk and with the wrong medication stopped, his fever began to loosen its grip. Not disappear, not yet, but loosen. His lips looked less blue. The tremor still came, but not as violently. Annie wrote every change in her notebook, then transferred the important details to the official chart because Dr. Cole asked her to. He asked. That alone told her something had shifted. At 4 o'clock, Richard found Annie in the hallway outside Daniel's room. She was leaning against the wall, drinking water from a paper cup, her eyes heavy from lack of sleep. "Miss Williams," he said. She straightened. "Mr. Whitmore, you don't have to stand every time I speak. I'm used to standing." The answer seemed to land somewhere he had not expected. He looked toward Daniel's closed door, then back at her. "I owe you more than I can say." Annie held the cup with both hands. "Daniel is the one who kept trying to tell people." Richard nodded. "And I was the one who didn't listen." She did not rescue him from that. He seemed to respect her more for it. After a moment, he said, "Detective Bennett wants formal statements tomorrow." She said, "You'll need to give one." "I will. My attorney can arrange counsel for you. Independent counsel, not mine. Paid for by me, chosen by you." Annie looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because you were dragged into my family's nightmare, and then accused inside my house. Your people accused me." Richard accepted the correction. "Yes, my people, and you almost believed them." He looked down. "I did." Annie waited. She had learned that powerful people often mistook confession for repair. Richard looked up again. "I won't ask you to forget that. I'm only telling you it won't happen again while you are under this roof." Before Annie could answer, Daniel's voice came from inside the room, rough but clear. "Annie?" She turned at once. Richard followed her in. Daniel was awake, propped slightly on pillows. His face was still pale, but his eyes had lost some of the fog. He looked at Annie first, then his father. "Did they find the packets?" he asked. Richard came to the bedside. "Yes." "And the phone?" "Yes." Daniel closed his eyes for a second. "Good." Dr. Cole moved to check the monitor, but Daniel looked at him. "I'm not confused right now." The doctor stopped. "I know. I want to hear what happens next." Richard sat down. "The police are processing everything. Victoria and Malcolm will be held. The lab confirmation will take time, but the preliminary results and video are strong." Daniel looked at Annie. "So they can't say I made it up?" "No," Annie said. "They can't. His mouth trembled. He tried to hide it by looking toward the window. I hated that most. What? Richard asked. Not being sick, not even the pain. Daniel swallowed. It was watching everybody look at me like my mind was leaving. Richard's face tightened. Danny, you would tilt your head, Daniel said, like you were trying to be patient with me, like I was a child telling a dream. Richard leaned forward, but he did not touch him without permission. I thought I was protecting you from stress. You were protecting yourself from believing me. The sentence left no room to hide. Annie looked away, but Daniel continued. Mom would have believed me. Richard closed his eyes. For a moment, the room belonged to Emily Whitmore, a woman Annie had never met, but now felt everywhere. In the hidden backup system, in Grace's loyalty, in Daniel's green journal, in the standards Richard had forgotten while marrying someone who knew how to perform grief. Richard opened his eyes. Yes, he said, she would have. Daniel looked surprised, as if he had expected another excuse. Richard's voice broke. Your mother listened better than I did. To you, to Grace, to everyone in this house. I used to think that made her soft. He shook his head. I was wrong. It made her harder to fool. Daniel's eyes filled. Annie quietly stepped back, but Daniel reached toward her. Stay. She stayed. Richard looked at her, then at his son. I'm sorry, not because the police found proof. Not because Annie found proof. I'm sorry because you were my son before you were a patient. And I let other people explain you to me. Daniel turned his face away, but this time he did not pull his hand back when Richard placed his on the blanket beside it. I don't know how to forgive you today, Daniel said. Richard nodded. You don't have to. Dr. Cole cleared his throat softly. Daniel, your fever is down to 100.9. Daniel looked at him. Is that good? It's better, because they stopped giving me that stuff. Dr. Cole took the question without defense. Yes, that appears to be part of it. Daniel looked at Annie. You wrote it down. She gave a small nod. My dad always trusted reports, Daniel said. Guess you made one he could read. Richard let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Later, Detective Bennett returned with a crime scene technician to collect formal copies of the backup footage. She spoke to Daniel only briefly, careful not to exhaust him. When she finished, she found Annie in the hallway. You did well, Bennett said. Annie was not sure how to answer. I was scared. Good. Brave people usually are. The ones who aren't scared tend to be reckless. Annie looked toward the stairs where Victoria had been led away. Will she get out? That depends on a judge, lawyers, evidence, and money. Bennett paused. Money can make noise. Evidence can still speak louder if people protect it. Annie understood the warning. She'll try to blame me again. She may. And Malcolm? He's already blaming her. That helps the case, not his character. Annie gave a tired nod. Bennett studied her for a second. Get your own lawyer before giving a full statement, Mr. Whitmore offered. Yes, take the help, but make sure the lawyer answers to you. That sounded like something Annie's mother would have said. I will. As Bennett left, Mrs. Grace came up the hall carrying a tray with soup, crackers, and tea. She handed Annie the tea first. You look like you're running on nerves and stubbornness. That obvious? To me? Very. Annie wrapped both hands around the warm mug. Mrs. Grace, did Mrs. Whitmore ever know about the backup system? Grace shook her head. Emily didn't tell many people. She said secrets can protect the weak or protect the wicked, depending on who holds the key. Annie looked toward Daniel's room. She protected him after all. Grace's eyes softened. A good mother doesn't always stop mothering just because she's gone. That sentence stayed with Annie. By evening, Richard ordered the West Library opened only long enough for Detective Bennett's team to remove evidence. After they left, he stood at the entrance, looking in but not stepping across the threshold. Annie passed on her way to get fresh towels and found him there. This room used to be Emily's favorite, he said without turning. I turned it into a place Daniel was afraid of. You didn't know what happened there. No, Richard said, but I knew he hated passing this door. I thought grief made him dramatic. Annie said nothing. Richard looked at her. You don't waste words. My mother says words should have to work for a living. For the first time since she had met him, Richard smiled faintly. Smart woman. She is. The smile faded. Tomorrow I want to speak with you about your future. Annie stiffened. My future? Not tonight. You've done enough. She did not like the sound of rich men deciding futures, even kindly. Mr. Whitmore, I'm not looking for anything. I know. The same 2 words he had said before, but Annie did not yet trust them. From Daniel's room came movement. Annie turned, ready to go back. Richard spoke before she left. Miss Williams? Yes? Today, when Daniel said you believed him, I realized something. He looked toward his son's door. A house can be full of educated people and still be foolish if no one listens to the person in pain. Annie held the towels against her chest. Then don't forget it when he gets better. Richard nodded slowly. I won't. Inside the bedroom, Daniel was awake again. He looked tired, but not as far away. Annie adjusted his blanket and checked his water. He watched her write in the notebook. What does it say now? He asked. She looked at the page. Fever lower, tremor reduced, patient alert, no almond milk given. Daniel closed his eyes. Best report I've heard all year. Annie smiled. Richard sat by the window, listening without interrupting. Dr. Cole reviewed lab updates in a chair near the medical table. Mrs. Grace left soup warming on the sideboard and told everyone they would eat if she had to stand there and shame them into it. For the first time, the room did not feel like a place waiting for Daniel to die. It felt like a place where he might return. And on the nightstand, where the glass of almond milk used to sit, Annie placed a sealed bottle of water, opened in front of everyone, plain and clear under the lamp. By the next morning, the Whitmore house had stopped pretending it was only a home. Police tape marked the West Library. Evidence stickers sat on cabinets in the kitchen. A patrol car remained near the front gate, and a private medical team had been brought in to monitor Daniel. Under Dr. Say's in the kitchen, Aller and daughter, and by daughters. Honor daughter, Iyer daughter, Itin daughter. Porter's direction. Richard no longer let any medication enter the room without 3 people checking it first. Dr. Cole did not complain. He had learned what unchecked certainty could cost. Daniel was awake more often now. Not strong, not healed, but present. That was enough to change how people breathed around him. Annie sat near the window with her notebook open when Richard came in holding his phone. His face was controlled, but she had seen enough of him now to know when fear had found a new shape. What happened? She asked. Richard looked at Daniel first. Victoria's attorney is filing an emergency statement. They're claiming she was misled by Malcolm and that you manipulated evidence after entering the house. Annie felt the words strike, but she did not move. Daniel pushed himself higher against the pillows. That's a lie. I know, Richard said. Daniel looked at him sharply. Knowing isn't enough. Richard accepted that without flinching. No, it isn't. Dr. Cole set down the chart. Can they make that argument stand? Richard's mouth tightened. They can try. She has money, connections, and a public image built on charity boards and hospital galas. Her attorney will say she was a frightened stepmother following bad advice from a trusted house manager. Annie closed her notebook. And me? Richard looked at her. They will say you wanted attention, money, or leverage. Daniel's voice rose as much as his body allowed. She saved me. Richard moved closer to him. Danny, I believe you. Then stop saying what they'll say like it matters more than what happened. The room went still. Richard sat beside the bed. You're right. Annie watched father and son, remembering how different the room had felt 2 days earlier. Richard had once filled it with orders. Now he was learning to hear rebuke from the person he had failed. Detective Bennett arrived an hour later with 2 updates. Malcolm had given a formal statement with counsel present. He admitted placing powder in Daniel's milk, altering access to medication, deleting footage from the main security system, and planting evidence in Annie's backpack. He insisted Victoria planned it. Will he testify? Richard asked. If the deal benefits him, yes, Bennett said. But we don't build a case on a man saving himself. We build it on evidence. She laid out what they had. Toxicology results, the packets from the service pantry, the burner phone, the backup footage, the video Annie recorded in the kitchen, the planted evidence clip, altered medication records, and Daniel's statement. Victoria's attorneys would still attack. That was expected. They'll go after Annie, Bennett said. They'll question why she filmed. why she hid in the pantry, why she kept private notes. Annie folded her hands together. I filmed because nobody believed Daniel. Bennett nodded. Say it exactly that way when asked. Richard stood. I want a press statement today. I won't let Victoria's side tell the first story. Bennett held up a hand. Careful, this is an active investigation. I won't discuss evidence. Then what will you say? Richard looked at Daniel. That my son was harmed in his own home. That he is recovering. That false statements about Annie Williams will be answered legally, and that I failed to listen when he first tried to tell me something was wrong. Daniel stared at him. Bennett studied Richard for a moment. That last part is not required. Richard's eyes stayed on his son. It is for him. By afternoon, the house filled with a different kind of tension. Richard's communications team wanted a controlled statement from the front steps. His attorney wanted less emotion. Detective Bennett wanted no interference with evidence. Dr. Porter wanted Daniel resting. Mrs. Grace wanted everyone to eat. You people think coffee is a meal, Grace said, setting soup on the small table in Daniel's room. It is not. Grief on an empty stomach just makes fools louder. Daniel gave a weak smile. I missed your soup, Grace softened. Then get well enough to complain about it properly. Annie laughed quietly, and for one short second the room felt human. Then Richard's phone buzzed. He read the message and went still, Daniel noticed. What now? Victoria's attorney released a statement first. Annie already knew before he said it. Richard read only part of it aloud. A recently hired caregiver with unknown motives. Unauthorized recordings. Emotional manipulation of a medically fragile young man. Daniel's face flushed with anger. No, Annie's stomach turned, but she kept her voice calm. That's what people do when facts corner them. They attack who found the facts. Richard looked at her. My team will respond. Daniel shook his head. I want to say something. Dr. Cole immediately objected. No, absolutely not. You're not strong enough. I'm strong enough to talk. Daniel, your body is still recovering from toxic exposure. Daniel looked at his father. If I stay quiet again, she wins a little. Richard's face changed. He had heard that. Bennett, still in the room, said, a short recorded statement may be safer than a live appearance. No details of evidence. Only his condition and his own words. Dr. Porter approved only 2 minutes, seated, with no reporters in the room. Richard knelt beside Daniel's bed. You don't owe the world your pain. Daniel answered, no. But I owe Annie the truth. Annie looked away. Daniel, you don't have to defend me. He gave her a tired look. You defended me when you had less reason. No one argued after that. They set up the recording in Daniel's bedroom, not to show weakness but to show reality. No makeup, no staged lighting beyond the lamp by his bed. Richard sat beside him, but not too close. Annie stood out of frame near the window. Mrs. Grace hovered by the door with folded arms, as if daring the entire internet to mistreat the boy. Daniel looked into the camera. His face was pale, his voice rough, but his eyes were clear. My name is Daniel Whitmore, he said. For weeks, I told people something was wrong. I told them I was afraid. I told them I had seen things that made me unsafe in my own home. Because I was sick, people thought I was confused. He paused, breathing carefully. Annie Williams listened to me. She noticed what happened after I drank the milk. She stopped me from drinking more. She did not manipulate me. She did not hurt me. She believed me when believing me cost her something. Richard stared at the floor, jaw tight. Daniel continued, I'm not ready to talk about everything, but I want one thing understood. The person who listened was not the person who hurt me. He looked briefly toward Annie, then back to the camera. That is all. The recording ended. Dr. Porter checked him at once. That's enough for the day. Daniel sank back, exhausted but steady. Annie could not speak. She only nodded when he looked at her. Richard released the statement with Bennett's approved limits. Within an hour, the first headlines shifted. Not completely. Money still made noise. Victoria's people still pushed back. But Daniel's face, Daniel's voice, Daniel's own words broke through the polished fog. That evening, Richard held his own short statement outside the front entrance. Annie watched from an upstairs window, standing beside Mrs. Grace. Reporters crowded beyond the gate, their microphones raised. Richard did not look like a billionaire giving a speech. He looked like a father who had been forced to learn humility in public. "My son is alive," he said, "because a young caregiver paid attention when others, including me, did not. I will not discuss evidence. I will not interfere with the investigation. But I will say this clearly. Annie Williams is not to be blamed for the harm done in this house. She helped expose it." A reporter shouted, "Mr. Whitmore, did you ignore your son's warnings?" Richard stood still. Then he said, "Yes." The shouting stopped for half a breath. Richard continued, "And I will live with that. But living with it means telling the truth now." Upstairs, Grace whispered, "That man just bought back a little piece of his soul." Annie watched Richard step away from the microphones. "Is it enough?" Grace looked at her. "Enough is for God to measure. But it is a start." Later that night, the house quieted again. Daniel slept. Dr. Cole remained near the medical table, reading toxicology guidance. Like a student humbled by a hard lesson, Richard sat outside Daniel's door instead of inside, giving his son space while refusing to leave. Annie walked down to the kitchen for water. The counter where Malcolm had mixed the powder had been cleaned, but Annie could still see it in her mind. Victoria's hand. The packet, the spoon stirring until poison disappeared. Mrs. Grace entered behind her. "You all right?" Annie leaned against the counter. "I don't know. That is an honest answer. I thought when they got arrested, it would feel over." Grace poured water into 2 glasses. "Evil leaving the house doesn't sweep up after itself." Annie took the glass. "My mother is going to be scared when she sees the news. Call her. I don't want her worrying." Grace gave her a look only older women had perfected. "Child, she has been worrying since the day you were born. Give the woman facts to work with." Annie smiled, tired and small. "Yes, ma'am." Before she could dial, Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "Annie, your mother is at the gate." Annie straightened. "What?" "She saw the news. Security called me. I told them to bring her in, if that's all right." Annie was already moving. Denise Williams entered the foyer 5 minutes later in her work coat. Hair pulled back, face tight with fear. Annie barely reached the bottom step before her mother pulled her into her arms. "Girl," Denise whispered, holding her hard. "You said long shift. You did not say crime scene." Annie pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and, for the first time since the pantry, let herself shake. Richard stood back, silent. Denise looked over Annie's shoulder at him. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes, ma'am. My daughter safe in this house now?" Richard did not rush his answer. "She is. And I failed to make it that way sooner." Denise studied him. "Don't give me rich man poetry. You got security on her?" "Yes." "You got a lawyer for her?" "Arranged, but she chooses." "You got somebody making sure those people don't twist this on her?" "I do." Denise nodded once. "Good. Then I'll say thank you for letting her help your son. But understand me. She is not a shield for your family's shame." Richard bowed his head slightly. "No, ma'am. She is not." Annie wiped her face. "Mama." Denise cupped her cheek. "I'm proud of you. Mad too. But proud." That made Annie laugh through tears. Upstairs, Daniel woke briefly and asked to see Annie's mother. Denise went in softly, carrying the kind of presence that had comforted sick neighbors and frightened landlords for years. Daniel looked at her and whispered, "Your daughter saved me." Denise took his hand carefully. "Sounds to me like she listened. That's different. Saving starts with listening." Daniel's eyes moved to Richard, who stood at the doorway. Richard heard it. So did Annie. And in that bedroom, where experts had failed and money had nearly buried the truth, an ordinary mother's words settled over everyone like a final instruction. 3 weeks later, Daniel Whitmore walked across his bedroom without holding the bed rail. It was not far. 6 steps from the bed to the window, then 6 steps back. Dr. Cole stood close enough to catch him but did not touch him. Richard stood near the chair with both hands folded in front of his mouth. Annie watched from the doorway, her notebook held against her chest. Daniel reached the window and looked out at the lake. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he turned, tired but smiling. That count? Dr. Cole checked his watch, as if the answer required science. That counts. Richard let out a breath he had been holding for a month. He crossed the room, then stopped before he reached Daniel, remembering not to rush him. Daniel noticed. "You can hug me, Dad." Richard did, carefully at first, then harder when Daniel leaned into him. The boy was still thin. His strength came back in pieces. Some mornings his hands trembled. Some afternoons, he slept for hours. But the fever was gone. His lips were no longer blue. The fog that had made people doubt him had lifted enough for his voice to find itself again. Dr. Porter's full report had confirmed what the first tests showed. Repeated low-dose exposure through the almond milk, worsened by altered medication. Victoria's attorney still tried to wrap the truth in nicer words. But Malcolm's statement, the backup footage, the packets, the burner phone, and Annie's video left little room to hide. The case would take time. Lawyers always made time expensive. But Daniel was alive, and this time the truth had records. Mrs. Grace entered carrying a tray with chicken soup and cornbread. "If everybody is done looking like a church painting, this boy needs lunch." Daniel laughed softly. "I walked 12 steps. I think I earned peach cobbler." "You earned broth," Grace said. "Cobbler is for people who don't scare old women into praying all night. I'll work up to it." "You do that." Annie smiled and stepped back to leave, but Richard called her name. "Miss Williams, do you have a few minutes?" Annie looked at her mother, who had come by after her shift at the dry cleaner, and was sitting near the hall with a paper cup of coffee. Denise raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Be careful, but go." Annie followed Richard downstairs to the West Library. The room had changed. The police tape was gone. The shelves had been dusted. The green journal Daniel had come looking for was back in the cabinet by the fireplace, sealed now in a clear protective cover. Richard did not sit behind the desk. Instead, he stood beside it, as though he had no wish to look like a man conducting business. "I wanted to speak here," he said, "because this room was where my son's truth was first threatened. It should also be where I say plainly what I owe." Annie shifted her weight. "Mr. Whitmore, you don't owe me a speech." "No," he said. "I owe you more than that." He opened a folder on the desk. Annie saw official papers, a letterhead from a nursing college, and a bank document clipped beneath it. Her body went still. Richard noticed. "You are not being paid to stay quiet. There will be no agreement that limits what you say." Detective Bennett reviewed this. Your attorney reviewed it. Your mother may review it. You may refuse all of it. Annie did not touch the folder. "What is it?" "A scholarship fund in your name. Full tuition for nursing school, books, housing if you need it, transportation, and a living stipend so you don't have to choose between class and your mother's electric bill." Annie stared at the papers, but the words would not settle. Richard continued, quieter now. "Your mother's medical and household expenses will be covered through a separate assistance trust. Again, no silence clause. No condition except that you allow someone to help after you helped my son." Annie's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for money." "I know." Richard's voice was steady. "That is why I can offer this without insulting what you did. If you had wanted money, Victoria would have known how to use that against you. You wanted Daniel heard." Annie looked away toward the fireplace. "People like me get nervous when rich people say they want to help." "They should," Richard said. "Too often help comes with a leash." She looked back at him then. He met her eyes. "This one doesn't. You saved Daniel's life before you had the title you were working toward. I would like to help you earn it." The door opened before Annie could answer. Denise stepped in, not apologizing for listening. "Let me see those papers." Richard handed them over at once. Denise read enough to understand the shape of it, then looked at her daughter. "It says you choose the school?" "Yes, ma'am," Richard said. "And she gets her own lawyer?" "She already has one. Paid for by me. Directed by her. No interviews unless she wants them?" "Correct." Denise looked at Annie. Her face softened. "Baby, pride is good when it keeps your back straight. Don't let it block a door God opened." Annie pressed her fingers to her father's watch. "What if I can't do it?" Denise gave her a look. You stood in front of billionaires, doctors, police, and a woman with murder in her heart. Do not tell me anatomy class is where you plan to fall apart. A laugh broke out of Annie, and with it came the tears she had been holding back for days. Richard turned slightly, giving her privacy. Denise pulled her close. Your daddy would be making a fool of himself right now, she whispered. Telling everybody in Chicago his baby was going to be a nurse. Annie cried harder then, but not from fear. At the doorway, Daniel's voice came weakly. Future nurse. Annie looked up. He stood there with Dr. Cole behind him and Grace pretending she had not helped him down the hall. Daniel held out a small box. You were supposed to wait until the ceremony, Richard said. Daniel shrugged. I almost died. I don't wait well anymore. Annie wiped her face and took the box. Inside was a simple name badge, silver with black lettering. Annie Williams, future nurse. She covered her mouth. Daniel smiled. You saved my life before you had the title. Dr. Cole cleared his throat. He insisted on that wording. It's true, Daniel said. Dr. Cole looked at Annie. His apology had been waiting since the night of the arrest. But this time it came without professional polish. I should have listened to you sooner. More than that, I should have listened to him. I let my title make me deaf. Annie held the badge in both hands. Then don't let it happen to someone else. I won't, he said. Grace nodded once. Good. That's the only apology worth keeping. Months later, on a clear September morning, Annie stood outside the nursing school entrance in a pressed blouse and the same old watch on her wrist. Her shoes were new, but she still walked as if she remembered every floor she had ever cleaned, every bus she had ever taken, every room where she had been expected to stay quiet. Denise stood beside her with a tissue already in hand. Mrs. Grace had come too, wearing a church hat because, as she said, some victories require proper headwear. Richard arrived without cameras. Daniel came with a cane he hated but used because Grace threatened him with it. He looked healthier now. Not fully restored, not yet, but alive in a way that reached his eyes. You nervous? He asked Annie. Yes. Good. Detective Bennett said brave people usually are. Annie smiled. She did say that. Richard stepped forward. Annie, before you go in, I want you to know something. The foundation is changing its patient advocacy policy. Home care workers, aides, nurses, kitchen staff, anyone close to a patient can now file urgent safety concerns directly to independent review. No supervisor can bury it. Annie looked at him. Daniel did that. You both did. Daniel added, Mom would have liked it. Richard nodded. Yes, she would have. The bell rang inside the building. Students began moving through the doors, carrying backpacks, coffee, fear, and hope. Annie looked down at the badge Daniel had given her. She did not wear it on her uniform yet. Not officially. But she kept it in her pocket, where she could touch it when doubt got loud. Denise kissed her cheek. Go learn how to boss doctors around properly. Daniel grinned. She already knows. Annie laughed, then looked at the people standing with her. Her mother, who had taught her dignity. Grace, who had taught her that silence could become sin. Daniel, who had survived being doubted. Richard, who had learned too late but not too late to change. She stepped toward the entrance. For most people passing by, she was just another student starting her first day. But Annie knew better. She was the girl who had been told to stay in her place and had chosen Daniel's life over her own safety. She was the voice that shook but did not stop. She was proof that justice did not always arrive first with a badge, a title, or a white coat. Sometimes justice came in worn shoes, carrying a notebook, brave enough to say no when everyone else had learned to stay silent. The lesson of this story is that truth often begins with the person everyone else overlooks. Annie had no wealth, title, or power. But she paid attention when others were too proud, too afraid, or too blind to listen. The story reminds us that compassion is not weakness, and silence is not always peace. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, speaking with a shaking voice, and risking everything to protect someone who cannot protect themselves. Real justice begins when we listen to the vulnerable, believe the wounded, and refuse to let status decide whose voice matters. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.